Hello everyone, hello, and welcome to another reading ASMR. I'm Khione Aria, for anyone who might be new here. We do these periodically from time to time. I hope everyone is doing well today, and as the title says, we're going to be reading some Edgar Allan Poe. Let me know how my sound is, let me know how my voice is. Might need to turn my fan down a bit. Hello everyone, let me see here. Who else here? Well, poor Whisk Lost Victorian. Hello my darlings. Hello. Well, poor with the little box kitties. The one in the middle is that Whisk with the lovely little heart hug emote. Lost Victorian. Hi everyone. Hello darling. Hello. Based on the background image, I guess the poetry is going to be spooky. Yes, Edgar Allan Poe. He's known for his gothic horror and his spooky poetry and short stories. Ikazal, yes, Ikazal. Well, poor and Lost Victorian. Audio sounds good on my end. Thank you so much, well, poor baby. I appreciate that a ton. And as you guys can see, we have a new little buddy in chat here, the Stream Elements little Robobo robot. They are there. That little guy is there for alerts and whatnot if I need them, if I get them. So don't mind him. He's just going to be hanging out with us. Cute little robot. Sounds good to me as well. I'm glad to hear that, Lost Speaker. Glad. And I definitely need to do more streams where I practice this voice, because I know a lot of you like my ASMR voice. Okay, so you guys can't hear my fan. Alright, because it's really hot today. So I have my ceiling fan on max. Not volume. I don't know what the word is. It's on max. I was worried that the sound would transfer over here. I see Cute Ribbit and Cute 173 sitting on one of the troopers. Yeah! And then you guys are here. For anyone who doesn't remember, might be new, you guys are the little unicorn. And we have our lovely little baby brother, Caco Demon from Brosi over there. And I have my tea here. I have the book. Now, for any of you who might be familiar with Mr. Edgar Allan Poe, if you have requests, please let me know them. But I have a list of ones I'm going to read to you guys. So his works are separated into tales and poetry. And I think we'll start. I was considering whether I want to start with one of his most well-known pieces. I miss my Snuffle Boy buddy. Oh, I forgot to put him in here. Add him next time. Because I don't want too many little buddies everywhere. I just chose a few. Just chose a few. They're very sleepy today, so. I could start with, let's see here. Because one of his most famous poems is called The Raven. But I feel like everyone has heard The Raven. And there are some of his works that a lot of people don't really know about. Let me see here. It sounds like you haven't. Okay, it's short, so let's start with that one. Because I was about to say, yes, Lux Victorian, you just said you're new to Poe. So let's read The Raven. It's a fairly short but well-known poem of his. I don't even know this person at all, so I don't know any of his works. Yes, that's true. Okay, so we'll read The Raven then. Let's see. Alright. So this is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door, "only this and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my book surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden who the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken sad uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more." Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortals ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word. Then I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Nearly this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when, with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but, with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bus of palace just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim, and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door. Bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further than he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, Other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, Doubtless, said I, what it utters is only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then, upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, with no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfume from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he has sent thee, respite and nepenthe, from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels named Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden who the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word or sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting, get thee back into the tempest in the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, with the bust above my door. Take thy beak out, my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. That is one of his most famous, if not his most famous poem of all time. And then I think I'll read another one that's pretty well known before we move on to his tales, or back onto his tales, because it was in the front of the book. Maybe I should have given you guys some backstory on him as well, because in these books there's also a bit of backstory. They're always very long. So. He's an American poet, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know. From the 1800s? Yep, the 1800s. So let me give you guys a bit of backstory about him really quick, just a bit. Edgar Allan Poe was perhaps the most original and influential American writer of his era, producing a stunning array of poems, short stories, and literary criticism, and lighting the way for generations of writers to come. The French poet Charles Baudelaire, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, was an early and enthusiastic admirer, producing lyrical translations of Poe's work that would exert a profound influence on French literature. Poe, he declared, took flight in dreams. German-language authors Nietzsche, Rilke, and Kafka all found their way to Poe in their turn, praising his skill and variety. Imagination only served him as a crutch for Kafka, and imagination has fewer pitfalls than reality has. In Britain, Oscar Wilde admired Poe as a marvelous lord of rhythmic expression, while Swinburne wrote of his strong and delicate genius, so sure of aim and faultless of touch. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, whose legendary detective, Sherlock Holmes, owed much to Poe's mystery tales, praised him as the master of all. Poe, he insisted, was the supreme original short story writer of all time. His brain was like a seed pod full of seeds which flew carelessly around, and from which have sprung nearly all our modern types of story. Just think of what he did in his offhand, prodigal fashion, seldom troubling to repeat a success, but pushing on to some new achievement. Poe's achievements are all the more admirable when weighed against the grim realities of his life, which seemed at times to be strange and fervid as one of his own tales of imagination. And then it goes on. So, one thing I do remember is he lost his beloved wife to sickness and all sorts of other stuff, so I won't get into that right now, but I will read one of his other I'm sorry if I keep bonking the mic, guys, it's hard to balance. This book is huge and heavy. My mic is right here. So the next one we'll read is Lenore, then I'll move on to some of his short stories. So this is Lenore by Edgar Allan Poe. Ah, broken is the golden bowl, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll, a saintly soul floats on the Stygian river. And Guy de Vere, hast thou no tear? Weep now or never more. See on yon drear and rigid bier, low lies thy love, Lenore. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenliest dead that ever died so young. A dirge for her, the doubly dead, in that she died so young. Wretches, ye loved her for her wealth, and hated her for her pride, and when she fell in feeble health, ye blessed her, that she died. How shall the ritual then be read? The requiem now, how be sung? By you, by yours the evil eye, by yours the slanderous tongue, that did to death the innocent that died, and died so young. Economus, but rave not thus, and let a Sabbath song go up to God so solemnly the dead may feel no wrong. The sweet Lenore hath gone before with hope that flew beside, leaving thee wild for the dear child that should have been thy bride. For her, the fair and debonair, that now so lowly lies, the life upon her yellow hair, but not within her eyes. The life still there, upon her hair, the death upon her eyes. Avaunt, tonight my heart is light, no dirge will I upraise, but waft the angel on her flight with a paean of old days. Let no bell toll, lest her sweet soul, amidst its hollowed mirth, should catch the note as it doth float up from the damned earth. To friends above, from fiends below, the indignant ghost is riven, from hell unto a high estate far up within the heaven, from grief and groan to a golden throne beside the King of Heaven. Oh, it's even shorter. Okay. Let's go on back to his tales or short stories. Let's start with, this is another very well-known one of his, The Telltale Heart. Let's see, page 203. Let me get the page turning sounds for you guys, because I know some of you will like that. There it is. Okay. So, the first short tale of his we will be reading is The Telltale Heart. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am, but why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How, then, am I mad? Hearken, and observe now, healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. Get some water. Okay. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it. Oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. Cautiously, the hinges creaked. I undid it just as so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye always closed. It was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him,
calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night.
Hi, Khione. Hi, baby. Thank you so much, honey. Thank you, thank you.
So you see, he would have been a very profound old man. Indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the eighth night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened, through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. Oh, fire and crickets are a bit loud. Hold on, babe. Thank you. I was wondering about that. Okay. Let me know if that's better, everyone. Thank you so much, Yumi. I appreciate it a ton. Let's see here. There we go. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief, oh no. It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until, at length, a single dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And now have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed.
Thank you, Yume. Thank you so much, baby.
I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I've told you that I am nervous.
So I am. Thank you for the hearts.
And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder. Thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. The loud yell. I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor, pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, and the arms, and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. Tub had caught all. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police officer, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently, and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath. and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as excited to fury by the observation of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, louder, louder. Still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no. They heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder, louder, louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more, I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. It is the beating of his hideous heart.
Oh no, he went crazy. And welcome, Yumiko. Welcome to the stream. Make her feel welcome, everybody. Thank you once again for the sound check. I had a feeling, but I wasn't sure. I thought it might be a bit loud. So that helps me a ton. So the next one, I think we shall read. So there is. Alright, I like the book sounds. Yeah, can you still hear them, guys? I have the book on my desk. So, all the House of Usher is the one I want, but the Murders in the Rue Morgue. So, I almost called him Lovecraft because we read so much Lovecraft. So Poe also did mystery stories. This looks like a longer one. It's like I read in the introduction, Sir Conan Arthur Doyle? So Arthur Conan Doyle, I think I mixed up his name there, was inspired by him, and he's well known for the one, the only Sherlock Holmes. But there's that one. But the one I'm thinking of, let me see where it is. I hear the book Toscano. Yay! I'm glad you guys like the book sound. Yay! I like book sounds too. They're very pleasant. Okay. Let me go back to the beginning here. Let's check the table of contents. Let's do... Where is it? Oh, the premature burial. This is another spooky one. So that's 219. Mm-hmm. 219. I'm purposely doing more book sounds for you guys. There's the Telltale Heart. And if after I'm finished with the story you guys have questions, feel free to often ask me. Oh, and then another, one of my favorites after this one, the cast of Amontillado. I think it's Amontillado. It looks Spanish. Okay, so this one is called The Premature Burial by Edgar Allan Poe. Let me get a drink of water first. Okay. The premature burial. There are certain themes of which the interest is all-absorbing, but which are too entirely horrible for the purposes of legitimate fiction. These the mere romanticist must eschew, if he do not wish to offend or to discuss. Midnight! Hello, baby, welcome! Welcome to Edgar Allan Poe readings. See, these the mere romanticist must eschew, if he do not wish to offend or to discuss.
They are with propriety handled only when the severity and majesty of truth sanctify and sustain them. We thrill, for example, with the most intense of pleasurable pain over the accounts of the passage of Bersina, of the earthquake at Lisbon, of the plague of London, and of the massacre of St. Bartholomew, or of the stifling of the 123 prisoners in the black hole at Calcutta. But in these accounts it is the fact, it is the reality, it is the history which excites. As inventions, we should regard them with simple abhorrence.
The Raven is my favorite Edgar, but we read that one first, yeah. It's very good. Make her feel welcome, everyone. Midnight.
I have mentioned some few of the more prominent and august calamities on record, but in these it is the extent, not less than the character of the calamity, which so vividly impresses the fancy. I need not remind the reader that, from the long and weird catalogue of human miseries, I might have selected many individual instances more replete with essential suffering than any of these vast generalities of disaster. The true wretchedness, indeed, the ultimate woe, is particular, not diffuse. That the ghastly extremes of agony are endured by man the unit, and never by man the mass, for this let us thank a merciful God. To be buried while alive is, beyond question, the most terrific of these extremes which has ever fallen to the lot of mere mortality. That it has frequently, very frequently, so fallen will scarcely be denied by those who think. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. Who shall say where the one ends and where the other begins? We know that there are diseases in which occur total cessations of all the apparent functions of vitality, and yet in which these cessations are merely suspensions, properly so called. They are only temporary pauses in the incomprehensible mechanism. A certain period elapses, and some unseen mysterious principle again sets in motion the magic pinions and the wizard wheels. Silver cord was not forever loosed, nor the gold bowl irreparably broken, but where, meantime, was the soul? Apart, however, from the inevitable conclusion, a priori, that such causes must produce such effects, that the well-known occurrence of such cases of suspended animation must naturally give rise, now and then, to premature interments. Apart from this consideration, we have the direct testimony of medical and ordinary experience, to prove that a vast number of such interments has actually taken place. I might refer at once, if necessary, to 100 well-authenticated instances. One of very remarkable character, and of which the circumstances may be fresh in the memory of some of my readers, occurred not very long ago, in the neighboring city of Baltimore, where it occasioned a painful, intense, and widely extended excitement. The wife of one of the most respectable citizens, a lawyer of eminence and a member of Congress, was seized with a sudden and unaccountable illness, which completely baffled the skill of her physicians. After much suffering, she died, or was supposed to die. No one suspected, indeed, or had reason to suspect, that she was not actually dead. She presented all the ordinary appearances of death. The face assumed the usual pinched and sunken outline, the lips were of the usual marble pallor, the eyes were lustreless. There was no warmth. Pulsation had ceased. For 3 days the body was preserved unburied, during which it had required a stony rigidity. The funeral, in short, was hastened on account of the rapid advance of what was supposed to be decomposition.
Hello, Pizza Queen. Welcome, baby. Yes, the mod will always be there.
The lady was deposited in her family vault, which, for 3 subsequent years, was undisturbed. At the expiration of this term it was opened for the reception of a sarcophagus. But alas, how fearful a shock awaited the husband, who personally threw open the door. As its portals swung outwardly back, some white, apparelled object fell rattling within his arms. It was the skeleton of his wife in her yet unmolded shroud. A careful investigation rendered it evident that she had revived within 2 days after her entombment. that her struggles within the coffin had caused it to fall from a ledge, or shelf, to the floor, where it was so broken as to permit her escape. A lamp which had been accidentally left, full of oil, within the tomb, was found empty. It might have been exhausted, however, by evaporation. On the uppermost of the steps which led down into the dread chamber was a large fragment of the coffin, with which, it seemed, she had endeavored to arrest attention by striking the iron door. While thus occupied, she probably swooned or possibly died through sheer terror, and in falling, her shroud became entangled in some ironwork which projected interiorly. Thus she remained, and thus she rotted, erect. In the year 1810, a case of living inhumation happened in France, attended with circumstances which go far to warrant the assertion that truth is indeed stranger than fiction. The heroine of the story was a Mademoiselle Victorine La Fourcade, a young girl of illustrious family, of wealth, and of great personal beauty. Among her numerous suitors was Julien Bossuet, a poor litterateur or journalist of Paris. His talents and general amiability had recommended him to the notice of the heiress, by whom he seems to have been truly beloved. But her pride of birth decided her, finally, to reject him, and to wed a Monsieur Renel, a banker and diplomatist of some eminence. After marriage, however, this gentleman neglected, and perhaps even more positively ill-treated her. Having passed with some wretched years, she died, at least her condition so closely resembled death as to deceive everyone who saw her. She was buried, not in a vault, but in an ordinary grave in the village of her nativity. Filled with despair and still inflamed by the memory of a profound attachment, the lover journeys from the capital to the remote province in which the village lies, with the romantic purpose of disinterring the corpse and possessing himself of its luxuriant tresses. He reaches the grave. At midnight, he unearths the coffin, opens it, and in the act of detaching the hair, when he is arrested by the unclosing of the beloved eyes. In fact, the lady had been buried alive. Vitality had not altogether departed, and she was aroused by the carcasses, she was aroused by the caresses of her lover from the lethargy which had been mistaken for death. He bore her frantically to his lodgings in the village. He employed certain powerful restoratives suggested by no little medical learning. In fine, she revived. She recognized her preserver. She remained with him until, by slow degrees, she fully recovered her original health. Her woman's heart was not adamant, and this last lesson of love sufficed to soften it. She bestowed it upon Bossuet. She returned no more to her husband, but, concealing from him her resurrection, fled with her lover to America. 20 years afterwards, the two returned to France, in the persuasion that time had so greatly altered the lady's appearance that her friends would be unable to recognize her. They were mistaken, however, for at the first meeting, Monsieur Renel did actually recognize and make claim to his wife. This claim she resisted, and a judicial tribunal sustained her in her resistance, deciding that the peculiar circumstances, the long lapse of years, had extinguished, not only equitably, but legally, the authority of the husband. The chirurgical journal of Leipzig, a periodical of high authority and merit, which some American bookseller would do well to translate and republish, records in a later number a very distressing event of the character in question. An officer of artillery, a man of gigantic stature and of robust health, being thrown from an unmanageable horse, received a very severe contusion upon the head, which rendered him insensible at once. The skull was slightly fractured, but no immediate danger was apprehended. Trepanning was accomplished successfully. He was bled, and many of the ordinary means of relief were adopted. For anyone who doesn't know what trepanning is, it was an old medical method where they drilled a hole in your head to let either the bad out or the demons or all sorts of different things and let healing in. It was pretty crazy. He was bled, and many of the ordinary means of relief were adopted. Gradually, however, he fell into a more and more hopeless state of stupor, and finally it was thought that he died. The weather was warm, and he was buried with indecent haste in one of the public cemeteries. His funeral took place on Thursday. On the Sunday following, the grounds of the cemetery were, as usual, much thronged with visitors, and about noon an intense excitement was created by the declaration of a peasant that, while sitting upon the grave of the officer, he distinctly felt a commotion of the earth, as if occasioned by some one struggling beneath. At first little attention was paid to the man's asseveration, but his evident terror and the dogged obstinacy with which he persisted in his story had at length their natural effect upon the crowd. Spades were hurriedly procured, and the grave, which was shamefully shallow, was in a few minutes so far thrown open that the head of its occupant appeared. He was then seemingly dead, but he sat nearly erect within his coffin, the lid of which, in his furious struggles, he had partially uplifted.
Sorry for any mic bumping. Hello, Pizza Queen.
He was forthwith conveyed to the nearest hospital, and there pronounced to be still living, although in an asphytic condition. After several hours he revived, recognized individuals of his acquaintance, and, in broken sentences, spoke of his agonies in the grave. From what he related, it was clear that he must have been conscious of life for more than an hour, while inhumed, before lapsing into insensibility. The grave was carelessly and loosely filled with an exceedingly porous soil, and thus some air was necessarily admitted. He heard the footsteps of the crowd overhead, and endeavored to make himself heard in turn. It was the tumult within the grounds of the cemetery, he said, which appeared to awaken him from a deep sleep. But no sooner was he awake than he became fully aware of the awful horrors of his position. This patient, it is recorded, was doing well, and seemed to be in a fair way of ultimate recovery, but fell a victim to the quackeries of medical experiment. The galvanic battery was applied, and he suddenly expired in one of those ecstatic paroxysms which, occasionally, it superinduces. The mention of the galvanic battery, nonetheless, recalls to my memory a well-known and very extraordinary case in point, where its action proved the means of restoring to animation a young attorney of London who had been interred for 2 days. This occurred in 1831, and created, at the time, a very profound sensation wherever it was made the subject of converse. The patient, Mr. Edward Stapleton, had died, apparently, of typhus fever, accompanied with some anomalous symptoms which had excited the curiosity of his medical attendants. Upon his decease, his friends were requested to sanction a post-mortem examination, but declined to permit it. As often happens when such refusals are made, the practitioners resolved to disinter the body and dissect it at leisure in private. Arrangements were easily effected with some of the numerous corps of body snatchers with which London abounds, and upon the 3rd night after the funeral, the supposed corpse was unearthed from a grave 8 feet deep and deposited in the operating chamber of one of the private hospitals. An incision of some extent had been actually made in the abdomen, when the fresh and undecayed appearance of the subject suggested an application of the battery. One experiment succeeded another, and the customary effects supervened, with nothing to characterize them in any respect, except, upon 1 or 2 occasions, a more than ordinary degree of life-likeness in the convulsive action. It grew late, the day was about to dawn, and it was thought expedient, at length, to proceed at once to the dissection. A student, however, was especially desirous of testing a theory of his own, and insisted upon applying the battery to one of the pectoral muscles. A rough gash was made, and a wire hastily brought in contact. When the patient, with a hurried but quite unconvulsive movement, arose from the table, stepped into the middle of the floor, gazed about him uneasily for a few seconds, and then spoke. What he said was unintelligible, but words were uttered. The syllabification was distinct. Having spoken, he fell heavily to the floor. For some moments, all were paralyzed with awe, but the urgency of the case soon restored them their presence of mind. It was seen that Mr. Stapleton was alive, although in a swoon. Upon exhibition of ether, he revived and was rapidly restored to health, and to the society of his friends, from whom, however, all knowledge of his resuscitation was withheld, till relapse was no longer to be apprehended. Their wonder, their rapturous astonishment, may be conceived. The most thrilling peculiarity of this incident, nevertheless, is involved in what Mr. S. himself asserts. He declares that at no period was he altogether insensible, that dully and confusedly he was aware of everything which happened to him from the moment in which he was pronounced dead by his physicians to that in which he fell swooning to the floor of the hospital. "I am alive," were the uncomprehended words which, upon recognizing the locality of the dissecting room, he had endeavored in his extremity to utter. It were an easy matter to multiply such histories as these, but I forbear, for indeed we have no need of such to establish the fact that premature interments occur. When we reflect how very rarely, from the nature of the case, we have it in our power to detect them, we must admit that they may frequently occur without our cognizance. Scarcely, in truth, is a graveyard ever encroached upon, for any purpose, to any great extent, that skeletons are not found in postures which suggest the most fearful of suspicions. Fearful indeed the suspicion, but more fearful the doom. It may be asserted without hesitation that no event is so terribly well adapted to inspire the supremeness of bodily and of mental distress as is burial before death. The unendurable oppression of the lungs, the stifling fumes of the damp earth, the clinging to the death garments, the rigid embrace of the narrow house, the blackness of the absolute night, the silence like a sea that overwhelms, the unseen but palpable presence of the conqueror worm. These things, with the thoughts of the air and grass above, with memory of dear friends who would fly to save us if but informed of our fate, and with consciousness that of this fate they can never be informed, that our hopeless portion is that of the really dead. These considerations, I say, carry into the heart, which still palpitates, a degree of appalling and intolerable horror from which the most daring imagination must recoil. We know of nothing so agonizing upon earth. We can dream of nothing half so hideous in the realms of the nethermost hell, and thus all narratives upon this topic have an interest profound. An interest, nevertheless, which through the sacred awe of the topic itself, very properly and very peculiarly, depends upon our conviction of the truth of the matter narrated. What I have now to tell is of my own actual knowledge, of my own positive and personal experience.
I love your whisper. Thank you, baby. Thank you.
For several years, I had been subject to attacks of the singular disorder which physicians have agreed to call catalepsy, in default of a more definitive title. Although both the immediate and the predisposing causes, and even the actual diagnosis, of this disease are still mysterious, its obvious and apparent character is sufficiently well understood. Its variations seem to be chiefly of degree. Sometimes the patient lies, for a day only, or even for a shorter period, in a species of exaggerated lethargy. He is senseless and externally motionless, but the pulsation of the heart is still faintly perceptible. Some traces of warmth remain. A slight color lingers within the center of cheek, and, upon application of a mirror to the lips, we can detect torpid, unequal, and vacillating action of the lungs. Then again, the duration of the trance is for weeks, even for months, while the closest scrutiny and the most rigorous medical tests fail to establish any material distinctions between the state of the sufferer and what we conceive of absolute death. Very usually, he is saved from premature interment slowly by the knowledge of his friends that he has been previously subject to catalepsy, by the consequent suspicion excited, and above all, by the non-appearance of decay. The advances of the malady are, luckily, gradual. The first manifestations, although marked, are unequivocal. The fits grow successively more and more distinctive, and endure each for a longer term than the preceding. In this lies the principal security from inhumation. The unfortunate whose first attack should be of the extreme character which is occasionally seen would almost inevitably be consigned alive to the tomb.
Get more water.
My own case differed in no important particular from those mentioned in medical books. Sometimes without any apparent cause, I sank, little by little, into a condition of semi-syncope, or half-swoon, and, in this condition, without pain, without ability to stir, or, strictly speaking, to think, but with a dull lethargic consciousness of life and of the presence of those who surrounded my bed, I remained until the crisis of the disease restored me, suddenly, to perfect sensation. At other times, as quickly and impetuously smitten, I grew sick, and numb, and chilly, and dizzy, and so fell prostrate at once. Then, for weeks, all was void, and black, and silent, and nothing became the universe. Total annihilation could be no more. From these latter attacks I awoke, however, with a gradation slow in proportion to the suddenness of the seizure. Just as the day dawns through the friendless and houseless beggar who roams the streets throughout the long desolate winter night, just so tardily, just so wearily, just so cheerily came back the light of the soul to me. Apart from the tendency to trance, however, my general health appeared to be good, nor could I perceive that it was at all affected by the one prevalent malady. Unless, indeed, an idiosyncrasy in my ordinary sleep may be looked upon as superinduced. Upon awaking from slumber, I could never gain, at once, thorough possession of my senses, and always remained, for many minutes, in much bewilderment and perplexity, the mental faculties in general, but the memory in especial, being in a condition of absolute abeyance. In all that I endured there was no physical suffering, but of moral distress and infinitude. My fancy grew charnel. I talked of worms, of tombs, of epitaphs. I was lost in reveries of death, and the idea of premature burial held continual possession of my brain. The ghastly danger to which I was subjected haunted me day and night. In the former, the torture of meditation was excessive. In the latter, supreme. When the grim darkness overspread the earth, then with every horror of thought I shook as the quivering plumes upon the hearse. When nature could endure wakefulness no longer, it was with a struggle that I consented to sleep, for I shuddered to reflect that, upon awaking, I might find myself the tenant of a grave. And when finally I sank into slumber, it was only to rush at once into a world of phantasms, above which, with vast, sable, overshadowing wings, hovered, predominant, the one sepulchral idea. From the innumerable images of gloom, which thus oppressed me in dreams, I select for record but a solitary vision. Methought I was immersed in a cataleptic trance of more than usual duration and profundity. Suddenly there came an icy hand upon my forehead, and an impatient, gibbering voice whispered the word, "Arise!" within my ear. I sat erect. The darkness was total. I could not see the figure of him who had aroused me. I could call to mind neither the period at which I had fallen into the trance, nor the locality in which I then lay. While I remained motionless and busied in endeavors to collect my thoughts, the cold hand grasped me fiercely by the wrist, shaking it petulantly, while the gibbering voice said again, "Arise! Did I not bid thee arise?" "And who," I demanded, "art thou?" "I have no name, regions which I inhabit," replied the voice mournfully. "I was mortal, but am fiend. I was merciless, but am pitiful. Thou dost feel that I shudder. My teeth chatter as I speak, yet it is not the chilliness of the night without end, but the hideousness is insufferable. How canst thou?" I looked, and the unseen figure, which still grasped me by the wrist, had caused to be thrown open the graves of all mankind, and from each issued the faint, phosphoric radiance of decay, so that I could see into the innermost recesses, and there view the shrouded bodies in their sad and solemn slumbers with the worm. But alas, the real sleepers were fewer, by many millions, and those who slumbered not at all. There was a feeble struggling, and there was a general and sad unrest, and from out the depths of the countless pits there came a melancholy rustling from the garments of the buried. And of those who seemed tranquilly to repose, I saw that a vast number had changed, in a greater or less degree, the rigid and uneasy position in which they had originally been entombed. And the voice again said to me as I gazed, "It is not, oh, is it not a pitiful sight?" But before I could find words to reply, the figure had ceased to grasp my wrist, the phosphoric lights expired, and the graves were closed with a sudden violence, while from out them rose a tumult of despairing cries, saying again, "It is not, oh God, is it not a very pitiful sight?" Fantasies such as these, presenting themselves at night, extended their terrific influence far into my waking hours. My nerves became thoroughly unstrung, and I fell a prey to a perpetual horror. I hesitated to ride, or to walk, or to indulge in any exercise that would carry me from home. In fact, I no longer dared trust myself out of the immediate presence of those who were aware of my proneness to catalepsy, lest, falling into one of my usual fits, I should be buried before my real condition could be ascertained. I doubted the care, the fidelity of my dearest friends. I dreaded that in some trance of more than customary duration, they might be prevailed upon to regard me as irrecoverable. I even went so far as to fear that, as I occasioned much trouble, they might be glad to consider any very protracted attack a sufficient excuse for getting rid of me altogether. It was in vain they endeavored to reassure me by the most solemn promises. I exacted the most sacred oaths that under no circumstances they would bury me till decomposition had so materially advanced as to render further preservation impossible. And even then, my mortal terrors would listen to no reason, would accept no consolation. I entered into a series of elaborate precautions. Among other things, I had the family vault so remodeled as to admit of being readily opened from within. The slightest pressure upon a long lever that extended far into the tomb would cause the iron portals to fly back. There were arrangements also for the free admission of air and light, and convenient receptacles for food and water, in immediate reach of the coffin intended for my reception. This coffin was warmly and softly padded, and was provided with a lid fashioned upon the principle of the vault door, with the addition of springs so contrived that the feeblest movement of the body would be sufficient to set it at liberty. Besides all this, there was suspended from the roof of the tomb a large bell, the rope of which, it was designed, should extend through a hole in the coffin, and so be fastened to one of the hands of the corpse. But alas, what avails the vigilance against the destiny of man? Not even these well-contrived securities suffice to save from the uttermost agonies of living inhumation a wretch to these agonies foredoomed. There arrived an epoch, as often before there had arrived, in which I found myself emerging from total unconsciousness into the first feeble and indefinite sense of existence. Slowly, with a tortoise gradation, approached the faint gray dawn of the cycle day, a torpid uneasiness, an apathetic endurance of dull pain, no care, no hope, no effort. Then, after a long interval, a ringing in the ears. Then, after a lapse, still longer, a prickling or tingling sensation in the extremities. Then a seemingly eternal period of pleasurable quiescence, during which the awakening feelings are struggling into thought. Then a brief resinking into non-entity, then a sudden recovery. At length the slight quivering of an eyelid, and immediately thereupon electric shock of a terror, deadly and indefinite, which sends the blood in torrents from the temples to the heart. Now the first positive effort to think, and now the first endeavor to remember, and now a partial and evanescent success. And now the memory has so far regained its dominion that, in some measure, I am cognizant of my state. I feel that I am not awakening from ordinary sleep. I recollect that I had been subject to catalepsy, and now, at least, as if by the rush of an ocean, my shuddering spirit is overwhelmed by the one grim danger, by the one spectral and ever-prevalent idea. For some minutes after the fancy possessed me, I remained without motion. And why? I could not summon courage to move. I dared not make the effort which was to satisfy me of my fate, and yet there was something at my heart which whispered me it was sure. Despair, such as no other species of wretchedness ever calls into being. Despair alone urged me, after long irresolution, to lift the heavy lids of my eyes. I uplifted them. It was dark, all dark. I knew that the fit was over. I knew that the crisis of my disorder had long passed. I knew that I had now fully recovered the use of my visual faculties, and yet it was dark, all dark, the intense and utter raylessness of the night that endureth for evermore. I endeavored to shriek, and my lips and my parched tongue moved convulsively together in an attempt, but no voice issued from the cavernous lungs, which, oppressed as if by the weight of some incumbent mountain, gasped and palpitated with the heart at every elaborate and struggling inspiration. The movement of the jaws, in this effort to cry aloud, showed me that they were bound up, as it is usual, with the dead. I felt, too, that I lay upon some hard substance, and by something similar my sides were, also, closely compressed. So far I had not ventured to stir any of my limbs, but now I violently threw up my arms, which had been lying at length with the wrists crossed. It struck a solid wooden substance, which extended above my person at an elevation of not more than 6 inches from my face. I could no longer doubt that I reposed within a coffin at last. And now, amid all my infinite miseries, came sweetly the cherub hope, for I thought of my precautions. I writhed and made spasmodic exertions to force open the lid. It would not move. I felt my wrist for the bell rope. It was not to be found. And now the comforter fled forever. A still sterner despair reigned triumphant, for I could not help perceiving the absence of the padding which I had so carefully prepared. And then, too, there came suddenly to my nostrils the strong, peculiar odor of moist earth. The conclusion was irresistible. I was not within the vault. I had fallen into a trance, while absent from home, while among strangers. When or how, I could not remember. And it was they who had buried me as a dog, nailed up in some common coffin, and thrust deep, deep, and forever into some ordinary and nameless grave. As this awful conviction forced itself thus into the innermost chambers of my soul, I once again struggled to cry aloud. And in this second endeavor I succeeded. A long, wild, and continuous shriek or yell of agony resounded through the realms of the subterranean night. "Hello? Hello there?" said a gruff voice in reply. "What the devil's the matter now?" said a second. "Get out of that," said a third. "What do you mean by yelling in that air kind of style, like a catamount?" said a fourth, and hereupon I was seized and shaken without ceremony for several minutes by a junto of very rough-looking individuals. They did not arouse me from my slumber, for I was wide awake when I screamed, but they restored me to the full possession of my memory. This adventure occurred near Richmond in Virginia, which is in the United States, for anyone who doesn't know. Accompanied by a friend, I had proceeded upon a gunning expedition some miles down the banks of the James River. Night approached, and we were overtaken by a storm. The cabin of a small sloop, lying at anchor in the stream and laden with garden mold, afforded us the only available shelter. We made the best of it and passed the night on board. I slept in one of the only 2 berths in the vessel, and the berth of a sloop of 60 or 70 tons needs scarcely to be described. That which I occupied had no bedding of any kind. Its extreme width was 18 inches. The distance of its bottom from the deck overhead was precisely the same. I found it a matter of exceeding difficulty to squeeze myself in. Nevertheless, I slept soundly, and the whole of my vision, for it was no dream and no nightmare, arose naturally from the circumstances of my position, from my ordinary bias of thought, and from the difficulty, to which I have alluded, collecting my senses, and especially regaining my memory, for a long time after awaking from slumber. The men who shook me were the crew of the sloop, and some laborers engaged to unload it. From the load itself came the earthy smell. The bandage about the jaws was a silk handkerchief in which I had bound up my head, in default of my customary nightcap. The tortures endured, however, were indubitably quite equal, for the time, to those of actual sepulture. They were inconceivably hideous, but out of evil proceeded good. For their very excess wrought in my spirit an inevitable revulsion. My soul acquired temper. I went abroad, I took vigorous exercise, I breathed the free air of heaven. I thought upon other subjects than death. I discarded my medical books. Buchan I burned. I read no night thoughts, no fustian about churchyards, no bugaboo tales, such as this. In short, I became a new man, and lived a man's life. From that memorable night, I dismissed forever my charnel apprehensions, and with them vanished the cataleptic disorder, of which, perhaps, they had been less the consequence than the cause. There are moments when, even to the sober eye of reason, the world of our sad humanity may assume the semblance of a hell, but the imagination of man is no Carathis to explore with impunity in its every cavern. Alas, the grim legion of sepulchral terrors cannot be regarded as altogether fanciful, but, like the demons in whose company Afrasiab made his voyage down the Oxus, they must sleep, or they will devour us. They must be suffered to slumber, or we perish.
Oh, that was longer than I thought it was gonna be.
I've never read that one before. I liked it though. But I like all the way he writes.
Hello everyone, let me catch up with everyone. Let me see here. Midnight and Yumeko are here. The Raven is my favorite. Khione, hello my darlings. Wait, so every outpost, the same person at Perusing bow. That can be it. No, perusing just means, it's a word which means to inspect thoroughly. So yeah, it's not a name. I was just doing a bunch of alliteration for the title. A bunch of words. Darn, I missed it. I should watch the VOD later. Yes, honey, yes, the void will also be there for you, but the VOD will always be there for you guys. And if any videos from my channel are missing and you guys are wondering why, just let me know. I only tend to hide stuff where it's like an update, where it's like, hey, this was a March update. Well, that's not applicable anymore because it's no longer March, so I'll just private that usually. Really late. Sorry, forgot there was a stream today. LOL, I'm here. It's okay, Pizza Win. It's okay, baby. It's alright, honey. It's alright. I also did something a little different, and I put up the stream the night before. I really need to get into that habit. Hi. Oh, you love my whisper. I think I read that one already, but I'll read it again. Thank you, honey. I don't tend to enjoy whispering that much, though, because one, it's very difficult to keep up, and two, it's just, to my own ears, I don't like how it sounds, but I do it when I think it fits. Poe's the OG of spooky stuff. He's one of the few, yeah. M and Lovecraft. Who came first? I think Poe came first, because Lovecraft was in the 1900s, I think. I like the background. Thank you so much, baby. I have the credit down below, but I will read it out loud for you all. Give credit where credit is due. Let me see here. Okay. The credit is... It is an image by Macrovector on a site known as Freepik. Yes. Spooky little owl in the tree in the back would be a nice addition. Well, in lieu of an L, I have put 173 and a little ribbon. I think that suits us much, much better. So did he stay in the grave? Oh, no. Okay, so anyone who is confused, because I realize the language is very old-timey, because like I said, this is from the 1800s, so it might get a little confusing at times. So if at any time, even while I'm reading, you guys have questions, just drop them in chat and I will get to them after. Though I still try to pay attention to you guys at the corner of my eye every now and then. But so what happened to our narrator there in that story? So first, he had this very specific condition that made him go, it was called like cataleptic, I think. It made him go into states where he seemed like he was dead. Which it sounds like it's a similar word to catatonic, which means to go into like a coma-like state, I think. But let me double check. So let me do cataleptic. Oops. No. Cataleptic. No, I can't type cataleptic. Am I probably typing it incorrectly or something? Anyway, he had this condition where he would go into like these states where it was like he was dead. So he was constantly fearing death. He was constantly worrying about being buried alive. And he went through all these elaborate things to make his friends promise, you know, they wouldn't bury him alive. And only when he was sufficiently like rotting away, they would finally inter him in a tomb, bury him away. And he even had his family crypt set up that there was places to, like little receptacles to put food and water, and there was like a cord connected to the corpse, quote unquote, their hands so they could ring a bell. And then with the slightest movement, like the main gate entrance to the tomb would swing open. So he had all these crazy setup to not be buried alive, and I don't blame him because it's a thing that can happen, especially back in the day. Oh, geez. There are some horror stories I could share with you guys that I've heard of. The worst one I ever heard was this girl who came back to life, but they just reburied her alive a second time for some reason. It was so messed up. So basically what happened at the very end is he just went to, all that happened, we find out, is he went to sleep for the night. But because he has this condition, catalepsy, that's what it was called. It was called catalepsy. Catalepsy, there it is. A medical condition characterized by a trance or seizure with a loss of sensation and consciousness accompanied by rigidity of the body. So very much like rigor mortis when you die. So you seem like a corpse, but you're actually still alive. So he had just gone to sleep for the night, and he was abroad. He was traveling with some people. He was on a boat. And you know how on boats, the sleeping spaces aren't always the greatest? They're like these little tiny layered like indents. They're almost like little coffins, you know. And because you got to travel compact because it's a boat, like some of them aren't that big. So he wasn't laying on like a mattress, like a soft cushion or anything, because he was just on this boat. Oh, because they had to, that's what happened. They had to take shelter from a storm that was happening, and the only shelter they could find was this abandoned boat, like this little abandoned ship. And so they stowed away on there. And the little sleeping spaces were very narrow, and he barely squeezed himself in there. So you can imagine when he suddenly, he had like a nightmare that he had been abroad and buried alive in a simple grave because the people he was with weren't his friends and didn't have all his preparations, and he wasn't near his family tomb or anything because he was traveling abroad. And he had a nightmare about that.
and he started like screaming, but it turns out like there were these gentlemen that were loading stuff on this like seemingly abandoned ship. It was just a ship that was, people weren't in it at the time or something. That's what it sounded like to me, at least. And the workmen who were loading the cargo on the ship were like, whoa, why is this guy screaming? And they like woke him up and they're like, hey man, you know, it's okay, you know. And it turns out the darkness he was seeing was just like the narrow like ceiling of the bed above him, if that makes sense. It's like a bunk bed, if you guys know bunk beds, but like narrower. So he's like squeezed into this little place, and no wonder in his nightmare, like he was probably like half awake, half asleep at one point, and he was like hitting it, and it was like he was buried. And it's like, well, he smelled like damp earth. Well, that was explained because the cargo they were loading onto the ship smelled like soil for some reason. I mean, maybe because it was sitting around in the dirt, or maybe it was something packed with soil or whatever. So it was all these things that added up that made him think he was dead, when really he was just stuffed in this very small compartment for sleeping in the ship that made him think he was in a tomb. But after that horrible experience, he was like, man, I'm gonna stop worrying about death and I'm just gonna go live my life. Yeah, kind of like sleep paralysis, sort of. And he had like a really bad nightmare. And probably even, maybe it could have been sleep paralysis too. But after that experience, he's like, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna live my life, I'm not gonna think about death anymore. He throws out all his books and gets rid of all his stuff tied to death and the afterlife and medical stuff relating to death and corpses and stuff like that. He just gets rid of all that stuff, disconnects his life from it, and he just starts living. And you know, his catalepsy just goes away, because apparently he thinks it's like, he's like, maybe I got catalepsy because I was always constantly in fear of being buried alive, so maybe I contracted this weird like ailment or whatever, you know. And but he admits he's not really sure. So that's what happened at the end of that there. And then before that, he was just sharing like various tales of, here's this person that was buried alive, here's that person that was buried alive, and how it happened, and you know, that sort of thing, and so on and so forth. Okay. Then I kind of know Poe from school, but I barely remember anything. Yeah, most school children probably learned about Poe among like people like Byron, Frost. I don't think Lovecraft is usually taught in schools, which I find really strange. I can't think of Shakespeare is another one that comes up a lot. So it's another ASMR class where I learn new things. Yeah, hopefully all of you are learning something new. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so for the next one, oh, we have another famous one after the one I'm about to read. So we're going to be reading The Cast of Amontillado, In the Pit, in the Pendulum, and then The Oval Portrait, I think. No, we definitely didn't learn about Lovecraft. No, I don't understand why. He's pretty well-known and influential horror writer. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. Okay, an Amontillado is a type of wine. Is it Spanish or Italian? It is Spanish, so I'm right, so it's probably a Y sound. I'm going to check just in case. Amontillado. Yeah, I was right. I knew it. I know some Spanish. I studied it for a few years, but I've forgotten quite a lot. I guess they didn't want to teach kids about Eldritch Horror. Maybe, but I mean, you guys, I just read a Poe story to you guys where a dude murdered an old man just because he didn't like how one of his eyes looked, and he ripped his body apart and hid it in the floorboards. So that's a pretty famous one. Telltale Heart. So I don't know. Okay, so we're going to continue on to the next story, or the next shorts. I guess these are more short stories. The next one is called The Cast of Amontillado, which is a type of wine. And a cask, for anyone who doesn't know, is like a big barrel that they age wine in. No, that's
That's what it is. Now, this is the cast of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. Let me get some water first, that might be wise. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could. But when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although, in other regards, he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity, to practice imposture upon the British and Australian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countryman, was a quack, but in the matter of old wines, he was sincere. In this respect, I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting, party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado? A pipe? Impossible, and in the middle of the carnival?" "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado? I have my doubts. Amontillado. I must satisfy them. Amontillado. As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry. And yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go. Whither? To your vaults." "My friend, no. I will not impose upon you your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement, Lucchesi." "I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre." "Let us go nonetheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon." "And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person. I think that's a type of cape, maybe? Cloak? I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honor of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, I bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together on the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresos.
gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe?" said he. "It is further on," said I. "But observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned toward me and looked into my eyes with two filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. "Niter?" he asked at length. "Niter," I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision. "We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi. Enough," he said. "The cough is a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." True, I replied. And indeed, I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily. But you should use all proper caution. A draught of the Medoc will defend us from the damps. Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle, which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly, while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us, and I to your long life." He again took my arm, and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." A huge human foot d'or in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant, whose fangs are embedded in the heel. "And the motto?" "Nemo me bien lacessit." "Good," he said. "I don't know what that means. I think it's like no one will impugn something." The wine sparkled in his eyes, and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. Medoc is the type of wine. We had passed through walls of piled bones, with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The nitre," I said. It increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. Drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough." "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on, but first another draught of the Medoc." I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upward with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, the grotesque one. "You do not comprehend?" he said. "Not I," I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." "How? You are not of the Masons." Yes, I said. Yes. "You? Impossible." "Mason?" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said. "It is this," I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descended again, arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. Oh, those are wild. Three sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the fourth, the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones, we perceived a still interior recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavored to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi, he is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. To fetter is to, imprison someone. Enchain them to something. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall." Cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But I must first render you all the little attentions in my power. "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied. "The Amontillado." As I spoke these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I had before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labors and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the 5th and 6th and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamored. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and strength. I did this, and the clamor grew still. Clamorer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I completed the 8th and 9th and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last in the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "A very good joke indeed. An excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. Over our wine." "The Amontillado," I said. "Yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone." "Yes," I said. let us be gone. For the love of God, Montresor. Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, Fortunato! No answer. I called again, Fortunato! No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick on account of the dampness of the catacombs. I hastened to make an end of my labor and forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry, I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace resquiescat, which is rest in peace in Latin. So, I was quietly bringing up while I was reading the motto of the man's family, the one who buried the other guy alive. It's Nemo me impune las lacessit, which is, tell me what it means. No one attacks me with impunity. Motto of Scotland and the Order of the Thistle, which I do not know what that is. But it fits, though, because we're not really told why. What's the main guy's name is Montresor. So Montresor, we have no idea why he hates Fortunato so much. It doesn't really go into it, but all we know is he wants revenge against this guy. So he bricks him up deep in this catacomb that also houses wine, because that's what you do with wine. If you don't have a cellar for it, you just put it in some deep catacombs to keep it good and fresh. Store it, because it's very cold down there. But he tricked this gentleman. He got him drunk, and lured him into this small area where then he tied him up and bricked him off, entombed him alive. For whatever slights he visited upon this gentleman, which we're not really told what they are, because he just begins the story with, yeah, I don't like this guy and I'm gonna exact my revenge upon him. I'm gonna lie to him and tell him there's this amazing wine, which, let me look up this wine. Well, I already had it open. Amontillado. So Amontillado, is a very unique wine due to its dual aging process. First under the veil of flor, typical of fino and manzanilla, followed by a period in which the flor disappears and the wine is exposed to oxidation. So I don't know what most of this mean. Literally, it's an alcoholic beverage closely related to sherry. Unless people have read Poe's story or are wine connoisseurs, they probably haven't heard of it, much less seen a cask of it. Casks, by the way, are barrels for storing wine or other drinks, and they come in many titles. So there you go, guys. The wine gets filled with spooks if you put it in. Yes, it's got the special extra property of being very spooky. So it's a very fancy wine. Amontillado is an amber-colored dry sherry, which leaves a complex, nutty, and rich finish on the palate. It is fortified to contain between 17.5 to 18% alcohol, but is not as dry as the Fino sherry. Amontillado has notes of tobacco and toasted cedar and a hazelnut aroma. That sounds very fancy. One of the few alcohols I do enjoy is wine, but it's very rare that I drink it. So, let's see what else. Yes, The Pit and the Pendulum is next. This is another one of Poe's very famous short stories, or tales. Let me... And then, it's a short one. Masquerade. Okay, I'm going to pick the order I read. Okay, so first I'm going to read you a short one. Not The Pit and the Pendulum. I'm going to read a short one. Short spooky one first.
called the Oval Portrait. They could sell it as spook wine. I'd love to have some spooky wine. That'd be fantastic. Hanging out with all the skelly boys down there. All the bones and the ghosts. Okay. So, I'm going to read the Oval Portrait. Then, I think the next one is... Yep, The Mask of the Red Death. And then... I think we might finish with The Pit in the Pendulum, unless any of you lovely darlings have requests if you already know Poe, but if not, that's fine. Just a little short reading stream today. So, this is the Oval Portrait by Edgar Allan Poe. The chateau into which my valet had ventured to make forcible entrance, rather than permit me, in my desperately wounded condition, to pass the night in the open air, was one of those piles of calm mingled gloom and grandeur which have so long frowned among the Apennines, not less in fact than in the fancy of Mrs. Radcliffe. To all appearance it had been temporarily and very lately abandoned. We established ourselves in one of the smallest and least sumptuously furnished apartments. It lay in a remote turret of the building. Its decorations were rich, yet tattered and antique. Its walls were hung with tapestry and bedecked with manifold and multiform armorial trophies, together with an unusually great number of very spirited modern paintings in frames of rich gold and arabesque. In these paintings, which depended from the walls not only in their main surfaces, but in very many nooks which the bizarre architecture of the chateau rendered necessary, in these paintings, my incipient delirium, perhaps, had caused me to take deep interest, so that I bade Pedro to close the heavy shutters of the room, since it was already night, to light the tongues of a tall candelabrum which stood by the head of my bed, and to throw open far and wide the fringed curtains of black velvet which enveloped the bed itself. I wished all this done that I might resign myself, if not to sleep, at least alternately to the contemplation of these pictures, and the perusal of a small volume which had been found upon the pillow, and which purported to criticize and describe them. Long, long I read, and devoutly I gazed. Rapidly and gloriously the hours flew by, and the deep midnight came. The position of the candelabrum displeased me, and outreaching my hand with difficulty, rather than disturb my slumbering valet, I placed it so as to throw its rays more fully upon the book. But the action produced an effect altogether unanticipated. The rays of the numerous candles, for there were many, now fell within a niche of the room, which had hitherto been thrown into deep shade by one of the bedposts. I thus saw in vivid light a picture all unnoticed before. It was the portrait of a young girl just ripening into womanhood. I glanced at the painting hurriedly, and then closed my eyes. Why I did this was not at first apparent even to my own perception. But while my lids remained thus shut, I ran over in my mind my reason for shutting them. It was an impulsive movement, to gain time for thought, to make sure that my vision had not deceived me, to calm and subdue my fancy for a more sober and more certain gaze. In a very few moments I again looked fixedly at the painting. That I now saw aright I could not and would not doubt, for the first flashing of the candles upon that canvas had seemed to dissipate the dreamy stupor which was stealing over my senses, and to startle me at once into waking life. The portrait, I have already said, was that of a young girl. It was a mere head and shoulders, done in what is technically termed a vignette manner, much in the style of the favored heads of Sully. The arms, the bosom, and even the ends of the radiant hair melted imperceptibly into the vague yet deep shadows which formed the background of the whole. The frame was oval, richly gilded and filigreed in moresque. As a thing of art, nothing could be more admirable than the painting itself. But it could have been neither the execution of the work, nor the immortal beauty of the countenance, which had so suddenly and so vehemently moved me. Least of all, could it have been that my fancy, shaken from its half-slumber, had mistaken that head for that of a living person? It saw at once that the peculiarities of the design, of the vignetting, and of the frame, must have instantly dispelled such an idea, must have prevented even its momentary entertainment. Thinking earnestly upon these points, I remained, for an hour perhaps, half sitting, half reclining, with my vision riveted upon the portrait.
At length, satisfied with the true secret of its effect, I fell back within the bed. I had found the spell of the picture in an absolute lifelikeness of expression, which, at first startling, finally confounded, subdued, and appalled me. With deep and reverent awe, I replaced the candelabrum in its former position. The cause of my deep agitation being thus shut from view, I sought eagerly the volume which discussed the paintings and their histories. Turning to the number which designated the oval portrait, I there read the vague and quaint words which follow. She was a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. And evil was the hour when she saw and loved and wedded the painter. He passionate, studious, austere, and having already a bride in his art, she a maiden of rarest beauty, and not more lovely than full of glee. All light and smiles, and frolicsome as the young fawn, loving and cherishing all things, hating only the art which was her rival, dreading only the palette and brushes and other untoward instruments which deprived her of the countenance of her lover. It was thus a terrible thing for this lady to hear the painter speak of his desire to portray even his young bride. She was humble and obedient, and sat meekly for many weeks in the dark, high turret chamber, where the light dripped upon the pale canvas only from overhead. But he, the painter, took glory in his work, which went on from hour to hour, and from day to day, and he was passionate and wild and moody man, who became lost in reveries, so that he would not see that the light which fell so ghastly in the lone turret withered the health and the spirits of his bride, who pined visibly to all but him. Yet she smiled on and still on, uncomplainingly, because she saw that the painter, who had high renown, took a fervid and burning pleasure in his task, and wrought day and night to depict her who so loved him, yet who grew daily more dispirited and weak. And in sooth, some who beheld the portrait spoke of its resemblance in low words, as of a mighty marvel, and a proof not less of the power of the painter than of his deep love for whom he depicted so surpassingly well. But at length, as the labor drew nearer to its conclusion, there was admitted none into the turret. For the painter had grown wild with the ardor of his work, and turned his eyes from the canvas rarely, even to regard the countenance of his wife, and he would not see that the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn from the cheeks of her who sat beside him. And when many weeks had passed, and but little remained to do, save one brush upon the mouth and one tint upon the eye, the spirit of the lady again flickered up as the flame within the socket of the lamp, and then the brush was given, and then the tint was placed, and, for one moment, the painter stood entranced before the work which he had wrought, but in the next, while he yet gazed, he grew tremulous and very pallid, and aghast, and crying with a loud voice, "This is indeed life itself!" Turned suddenly to regard his beloved. She was dead. Oh no. So, the painting is haunted, or it's implied that it is, and that he transferred her soul into the painting, because she died there in the room while he was painting. And it's also implied that he used her blood in the painting? Like right here. And he would not see that the tints which he spread upon the canvas were drawn from the cheeks of her who sat beside him. Which, maybe that's what that means, but probably not, because how could he cut her? I suspected she would die. Yeah, because he wasn't even, like, taking very good care of her. He was just so obsessed with this painting that she just died. Didn't get proper sleep, or eating, or drink, or sunlight. She was also very heartbroken, because he cared more about his painting than her. Okay, this is another shorter one. Let me get up and stretch here. Little baby Sasa
He's napping. Kicking in his sleep. He's on my big armchair behind me. Has a bunch of plushies on it, but I saved this one little space for him. Grow up. Sometimes he kicks the plushies around in his sleep. So cute. I don't understand how kids are supposed to understand all this. Well, it's supposed to be guided through with a professional, right? The professor, the teacher who teaches it to you, who's gone to school for all these years to learn these things, and then they explain it to the children, and they explain like the meanings behind it and why it's relevant today in the world, and so on and so forth. They teach so many complex things to children because, you know, children are smarter than we think, really. People underestimate how smart children are. And I think they usually teach stuff like this in high school, unless, I think you said you learned about it last Victorian. I'm not sure if they did it younger for your generation of children. But possibly. But even so, if they teach it in like middle school and whatnot, there's always going to be like a teacher there to explain it, you know, and talk about the themes and, you know, that kind of thing, and the words, like have a glossary with all the words, the difficult words and such, you know. So the next one is called The Mask of the Red Death. I know I remember stuff on this almost time with you in high school. Oh yeah, that just happens sometimes. Yeah, it's definitely very difficult. I'm 1,000 years old, so I've had plenty of centuries to, you know, get used to this kind of thing, and even I stumble on some of the words, as you guys can probably kind of tell. But yeah, it's fairly difficult because it's old-timey writing. I said it was a pain and remember nothing. Yeah, that just happens sometimes. Exactly. Now this is The Mask of the Red Death. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal, or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And then the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girded it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or the frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world would take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, their last ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade, but first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different. As might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre, the apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite.
These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth was white, the sixth was violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the walls failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum, amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room, and thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings with blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. It was in this apartment also that there stood a western wall, a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lung of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that at each lapse of an hour the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly. They made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion, and then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,300 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock. And then there were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. But, in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There were some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. He had directed, in great part, the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers, upon occasion of the great fete, and it was his own, or fete, I think, it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There was much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies, such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, writhed in and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon, there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then, for a moment, all is still, and all is silent, save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, that comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolution of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more of the thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure who had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally just, there are matters of which no jests can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to toe in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny might have difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its roile, stalked to and fro among the waltzer, he had seemed to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern, or blue chamber, in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room, where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of his group in the direction of the intruder, who, at the moment, was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterward, fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror, finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mass, which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one, the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died in each the despairing posture of the fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.
Cynical Apple! Hello, baby, hello. Welcome to the Entourage. You're new around here. I'm Khione Aria. Call me Khione, you can call me Aria. And don't forget to read the rules down below. We're just reading some Poe today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, thank you. And yes, this is back in a time when gay meant happy. So, for anyone who's wondering. Lost Victorian, but maybe that's the point, that they wanted to push us beyond a current level of thinking and understanding. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly what they do in school. They they have you read through difficult things to teach you and expose you to various things of the world. Sorry, I'm a bit out of it. I'm still sleepy. Yes, hello, make me feel welcome. Let's see. I think we'll end today. And if you have any questions, just let me know, Cynical Apple. Any questions about me, about my channel, my content. I mainly do gaming content. But I also do reading ASMRs like this. I've always tried my best to find a way around it so I wouldn't have to read it. I can see. That's understandable. That kind of thing was always my favorite when I was in little bitty baby angel school. I always liked reading old stories. We had different stories where I come from because I'm not from around here. I'm a dimensional traveler. But I always liked learning language and reading books and whatnot. I imagine extremely easy for kids nowadays with the internet. Yeah, the internet probably makes things so much easier. So we're going to end our stream for today with The Pit and the Pendulum. I'll answer that very quickly, Cynical Apple. Time for the most basic question: why you choose to become a VTuber? I chose to become a VTuber because I think it was the thing that fit me the most. It was something I never considered for the longest time. And I never thought would be for me because it was a very public sort of thing, and I'm a very reserved, private sort of individual, which is understandable as I am an angel. But I saw that I was inspired by some other VTubers who are also not human, and I just saw how much you can do with that, and I resolved to give it a try. I mean, I was like, why not? What's the worst that can happen? And so far, I've been streaming since December 7th of last year, and it's been going really well to my surprise, and I'm very good at speaking to an audience and entertaining and finding video games to play with for you guys and things to read for you guys and showing off my passions, because there are quite a few things that I'm very passionate about. And so, yeah. I thought it was more fitting than being a traditional streamer, you know. So, someone like me. Yeah, there you go. So now we're going to proceed with The Pit and the Pendulum, and this will be our last reading for the day. You're very welcome, Cynical Apple. Yeah. I was sick
sick unto death with that long agony. And when they at length unbound me, and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sentence, the dread sentence of death, was the last of distinct accentuation which reached my ears. After that, the sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum. It conveyed to my soul the idea of revolution, perhaps from its association in fancy with the burr of a mill wheel. This only for a brief period, for presently I heard no more. Yet for a while I saw, but with how terrible an exaggeration, I saw the lips of the black-robed judges. They appeared to me white, whiter than the sheet upon which I traced these words, and then even to grotesqueness, then with the intensity of their expression of firmness, of immovable resolution, of stern contempt of human torture. I saw that the decrees of what to me was fate were still issuing from those lips. I saw them writhe with a deadly locution. I saw them fashion the syllables of my name, and I shuddered because no sound succeeded. I saw, too, for a few moments of delirious horror, the soft and nearly imperceptible waving of the sable draperies which enwrapped the walls of the apartment. And then my vision fell upon the 7 tall candles upon the table. At first they wore the aspect of charity, and seemed white slender angels, who would save me. But then all at once there came a most deadly nausea over my spirit, and I felt every fibre in my frame thrill as if I had touched the wire of a galvanic battery, while the angel forms became meaningless spectres with heads of flame, and I saw that from them there would be no help. And then there stole into my fancy, like a rich musical note, the thought of what sweet rest must be in the grave. The thought came gently and stealthily, and it seemed long before it attained full appreciation. But just as my spirit came at length, properly, to feel and entertain it, the figures of the judges vanished, as if magically, from before me. The tall candles sank into nothingness, their flames went out utterly. The blackness of darkness supervened, all sensations appeared swallowed up in a mad rushing descent, as of the soul into Hades.
Thank you, Cynical Apple. Thank you, baby.
Then silence, and stillness, and night o'er the universe. I had swooned, but still will not say that all of the consciousness was lost. What of it there remained I will not attempt to define, or even to describe. Yet all was not lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In a swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost. Else there is no immortality for man. Arousing from the most profound of slumbers, we break the gossamer web of some dream. Yet in a second afterward, so frail may that web have been, we remember not that we have dreamed. In the return to life from the swoon there are 2 stages. First, that of the sense of mental or spiritual. Secondly, that of the sense of physical existence. It seems probable that if, upon reaching the second stage, we could recall the impressions of the first, we should find these impressions eloquent in memories of the gulf beyond. And the gulf is what? How at least shall we distinguish its shadows from those of the tomb? But if the impressions of what I have termed the first stage are not, at will, recalled, yet, after long interval, do they not come unbidden, while we marvel whence they come? He who has never swooned is not he who finds strange palaces and wildly familiar faces in coals that glow. Is not he who holds floating in mid-air the sad visions that the many may not view. Is not he who ponders over the perfume of some novel flower. Is not he whose brain grows bewildered with the meaning of some musical cadence which has never before arrested his attention. Amid frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amidst earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been moments brief, very brief periods when I have conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a later epoch assures me could have reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. Everyone, this is my familiar Moo, or Moo Moo. She's come to say hello to us. She often pokes into my streams to greet everyone, so please greet her. Hello, darling.
just come for pets.
Yes. And since you're new, Cynical Apple, I have two familiars. A very quiet boy familiar. He's napping on the armchair behind me. I have a very chatty girl familiar. And the quiet boy familiar, we call him Sa or Sasa. And then we have Moo, or Moo, my chatty girl familiar. I know what you're reading must be something profound and eye-opening, but I'm lost. That's totally fine, Cynical Apple. It's fine. I like explaining things to you guys after I read them because this is very old. This is Edgar Allan Poe's short stories. He's a very well-known horror writer from the 1800s, and his writing is very old-timey and difficult to follow, so no worries. Just enjoy the sound of my voice, and I'll be sure to give you guys a summary afterwards of what's going on.
And there she goes. Yes, she sounds adorable. She is indeed adorable. She sleeps by me every night. She's very sweet. Let's see here.
Okay. Amidst frequent and thoughtful endeavors to remember, amidst earnest struggles to regather some token of the state of seeming nothingness into which my soul had lapsed, there have been moments when I have dreamed of success. There have been brief, very brief periods when I've conjured up remembrances which the lucid reason of a lighter epoch assures me could have had reference only to that condition of seeming unconsciousness. These shadows of memory tell, indistinctly, of tall figures that lifted and bore me in silence down, down, still down, till a hideous dizziness oppressed me at the mere idea of the interminableness of the descent. They tell also of a vague horror at my heart on account of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then comes a sense of sudden motionlessness throughout all things, as if those who bore me, a ghastly train, had outrun in their descent the limits of the limitless, and paused from the wearisomeness of their toil. After this I called to mind flatness and dampness, and then all is madness, the madness of a memory which busies itself among forbidden things. Very suddenly there came back to my soul motion and sound, the tumultuous motion of the heart, and, in my ears, the sound of its beating. Then a pause in which all is blank. Then again sound and motion and touch, a tingling sensation pervading my frame. Then the mere consciousness of existence, without thought, a condition which lasted long. Then, very suddenly, thought, and shuddering terror, an earnest endeavor to comprehend my true state. Then a strong desire to lapse into insensibility. Then a rushing revival of soul and a successful effort to move. And now full memory of the trial, of the judges, of the sable draperies, of the sentence, of the sickness, of the swoon. Then entire forgetfulness of all that followed, of all that a later day and much earnestness of endeavor have enabled me vaguely to recall. So far, I had not opened my eyes. I felt that I lay upon my back, unbound. I reached out my hand, and it fell heavily upon something damp and hard. There I suffered it to remain for many minutes, while I strove to imagine where and what I could be. I longed, yet dared not to employ my vision. I dreaded the first glance at objects around me. It was not that I feared to look upon things horrible, but that I grew aghast lest there should be nothing to see. At length, with a wild desperation at heart, I quickly unclosed my eyes. My worst thoughts then were confirmed. The blackness of eternal night encompassed me. I struggled for breath. The intensity of the darkness seemed to oppress and stifle me. The atmosphere was intolerably close. I still lay quietly and made effort to exercise my reason. I brought to mind the inquisitorial proceedings and attempted from that point to deduce my real condition. The sentence had passed, and it appeared to me that a very long interval of time had since elapsed. Yet not for a moment did I suppose myself actually dead. Such a supposition, notwithstanding that what we read in fiction, is altogether inconsistent with real existence. But where and in what state was I? The condemned to death, I knew, perished usually at the auto da fe, and one of these had been held on that very night of the day of my trial. Had I not remanded to my dungeon, Or had I been remanded to my dungeon to await the next sacrifice, which would not take place for many months? This, I at once saw, could not be. Victims had been in immediate demand. Moreover, my dungeon, as well as all the condemned cells at Toledo, had stone floors, and light was not altogether excluded. A fearful idea now suddenly drove the blood in torrents upon my heart. For a brief period, I once more relapsed into insensibility. Upon recovering, I at once started to my feet, trembling convulsively in every fiber. I thrust my arms wildly above and around me in all directions. I felt nothing, yet dreaded to move a step, lest I should be impeded by the walls of a tomb. Perspiration burst from every pore, and stood in cold, big beads upon my forehead. The agony of suspense grew at length intolerable, and I cautiously moved forward with my arms extended, and my eyes straining from their sockets in the hope of catching some faint ray of light. I proceeded for many paces, but still all was blackness and vacancy. I breathed more freely. It seemed evident that mine was not, at least, the most hideous of fates. And now, as I still continued to step cautiously onward, there came thronging upon my recollection 1,000 vague rumors of the horrors of Toledo. Of the dungeons there had been strange things narrated, fables I had always deemed them, but yet strange and too ghastly to repeat, save in a whisper. Was I left to perish of starvation in this subterranean world of darkness, or what fate, perhaps even more fearful, awaited me? That the result would be death, and a death of more than customary bitterness, I knew too well the character of my judges to doubt. The mode and the hour were all that occupied or distracted me. My outstretched hands at length encountered some solid obstruction. It was a wall, seemingly of stone masonry, very smooth, slimy, and cold. I followed it up, stepping with all the careful distrust with which certain antique narratives had inspired me. This process, however, afforded me no means of ascertaining the dimensions of my dungeon, as I might make its circuit and return to the point whence I set out without being aware of the fact. So perfectly uniform seemed the wall. I therefore sought the knife which had been in my pocket when led into the inquisitorial chamber, but it was gone. My clothes had been exchanged for a wrapper of coarse serge. I had thought of forcing the blade in some minute crevice of the masonry, so as to identify my point of departure. The difficulty, nevertheless, was but trivial, although in the disorder of my fancy, it seemed at first insuperable. I tore a part of the hem from the robe and placed the fragment at full length and at right angles to the wall. In groping my way around the prison, I could not fail to encounter this rag upon completing the circuit. So, at least, I thought. But I had not counted upon the extent of the dungeon or upon my own weakness. The ground was moist and slippery. I staggered onward for some time when I stumbled and fell. An excessive fatigue induced me to remain prostrate, and sleep soon overtook me as I lay. Upon awaking and stretching forth an arm, I found beside me a loaf and a pitcher with water. I was much too exhausted to reflect upon this circumstance, but ate and drank with avidity. Shortly afterward I resumed my tour around the prison, and with much toil came at last upon the fragment of the serge. Up to the period when I fell, I had counted 52 paces, and upon resuming my walk I had counted 48 more, when I arrived at the rag. There were in all 100 paces. Admitting 2 paces to the yard, I presumed the dungeon to be 50 yards in circuit. I had met, however, with many angles in the wall, and thus I could form no guess at the shape of the vault. For vault I could not help supposing it to be. I had little object, certainly no hope, in these researches, but a vague curiosity prompted me to continue them. Quitting the wall, I resolved to cross the area of the enclosure. At first I proceeded with extreme caution, for the floor, although seemingly of solid material, was treacherous with slime. At length, however, I took courage and did not hesitate to step firmly, endeavoring to cross in as direct a line as possible. I had advanced some 10 or 12 paces in this manner, when the remnant of the torn hem of my robe became entangled between my legs. I stepped on it and fell violently on my face. In the confusion attending my fall, I did not immediately apprehend a somewhat startling circumstance, which yet, in a few seconds afterward, while I lay prostrate, arrested my attention. It was this. My chin rested upon the floor of the prison, but my lips, in the upper portion of my head, although seemingly at a less elevation than the chin, touched nothing. At the same time, my forehead seemed bathed in a clammy vapor, and the peculiar smell of decayed fungus arose to my nostrils. I put forward my arm and shuddered to find that I'd fallen at the very brink of a circular pit, whose extent, of course, I had no means of ascertaining at the moment. Groping about the masonry just below the margin, I succeeded in dislodging a small fragment and let it fall into the abyss. For many seconds I hearkened to its reverberations as it dashed against the sides of the chasm in its descent. At length there was a sullen plunge into water, succeeded by loud echoes. At the same moment there came a sound resembling the quick opening and as rapid closing of a door overhead, while a faint gleam of light flashed suddenly through the gloom and as suddenly faded away. I saw clearly the doom which had been prepared for me, and congratulated myself upon the timely accident by which I had escaped. Another step before my fall, and the world had seen me no more. And the death just avoided was of that very character which I had regarded as fabulous and frivolous in tales respecting the Inquisition. To the victims of its tyranny, there was the choice of death with its direst physical agonies, or death with its most hideous moral horrors. I had been reserved for the latter. By long suffering, my nerves had been unstrung, until I trembled at the sound of my own voice, and had become in every respect a fitting subject for the species of torture which awaited me. Shaking in every limb, I groped my way back to the wall, resolving there to perish rather than risk the terror of the wells, which my imagination now pictured many in various positions about the dungeon. In other conditions of mind, I might have had courage to end my misery once by a plunge into one of these abysses, but now I was the veriest of cowards. Neither could I forget what I had read of these pits, that the sudden extinction of life formed no part of their most horrible plan. Agitation of spirit kept me awake for many long hours, but at length I again slumbered. Upon arousing, I found by my side, as before, a loaf and a pitcher of water. A burning thirst consumed me, and I emptied the vessel at a draught. I must have been drugged, for scarcely had I drunk before I became irresistibly drowsy. A deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, of course I know not. But when once again I unclosed my eyes, the objects around me were visible. By a wild, sulphurous luster, the origin of what I could not first determine, I was enabled to see the extent and aspect of the prison. In its size, I had been greatly mistaken. The whole circuit of its walls did not exceed 25 yards. For some minutes, this fact occasioned me a world of vain trouble. Vain indeed. For what could be of less importance, under the terrible circumstances which environed me, than the mere dimensions of my dungeon? But my soul took a wild interest in trifles, and I busied myself in endeavors to account for the error I had committed in my measurement. The truth at length flashed upon me. In my first attempt at exploration, I counted 52 paces up to the period when I fell. I must then have been within a pace or two of the fragment of serge. In fact, I had nearly performed the circuit of the vault. I then slept, and upon awakening, I must have returned upon my steps, thus supposing the circuit nearly double what it actually was. My confusion of mind prevented me from observing that I had begun my tour with the wall to the left, and ended it with the wall to the right. I had been deceived, too, in respect to the shape of the enclosure. In feeling my way, I had found many angles, and thus deduced an idea of great irregularity. So potent is the effect of total darkness upon one arousing from lethargy or sleep. The angles were simply those of a few slight depressions, or niches, at odd intervals. The general shape of the prison was square. What I had taken for masonry seemed now to be iron or some other metal, in huge plates whose sutures or joints occasioned the depression. The entire surface of this metallic enclosure was rudely daubed in all the hideous and repulsive devices to which the charnel superstition of the monks has given rise. The figures of fiends in aspect of menace, with skeleton forms and other more really fearful images, overspread and disfigured the walls. I observed that the outlines of these monstrosities were sufficiently distinct, but that the colors seemed faded and blurred, as if from the effects of a damp atmosphere. I now noticed the floor, too, which was of stone. In the center yawned the circular pit from whose jaws I had escaped, was the only one in the dungeon. All this I saw indistinctly and by much effort, for my personal condition had been greatly changed during slumber. I now lay upon my back in at full length on a species of low framework of wood. To this I was securely bound by a long strap resembling a surcingle. I've never seen this word before. Surcingle. I'll have to look that up. It passed in many convolutions about my limbs and body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm to such extent that I could, by dint of much exertion, supply myself with food from an earthen dish which lay by my side on the floor. I saw to my horror that the pitcher had been removed. I say to my horror, for I was consumed with intolerable thirst. This thirst appeared to be the design of my persecutors to stimulate, for the food in the dish was meat pungently seasoned. Looking upward, I surveyed the ceiling of my prison. It was some 30 or 40 feet overhead, and constructed much as the side walls. In one of its panels, a very singular figure riveted my whole attention. It was the painted figure of Time, as he is commonly represented, save that, in lieu of a scythe, he held what, at a casual glance, I supposed to be the pictured image of a huge pendulum. Pendulum. Much as we see on antique clocks. There was something, however, in the appearance of the machine which caused me to regard it more attentively. While I gazed directly upward at it, for its position was immediately over my own, I fancied that I saw it in motion. In an instant afterward, the fancy was confirmed. Its sweep was brief, and of course slow. I watched it for some minutes, somewhat in fear, but more in wonder. Wearied at length with observing its dull movement, I turned my eyes upon the other objects in the cell. A slight noise attracted my notice, and, looking to the floor, I saw several enormous rats traversing it. They had issued from the well which lay just within view to my right. Even then, while I gazed, they came up in troops, hurriedly, with ravenous eyes, allured by the scent of the meat. From this, it required much effort and attention to scare them away. It might have been half an hour, perhaps even an hour, for I could take but imperfect note of time, before I again cast my eyes upward. What I then saw confounded and amazed me. The sweep of the pendulum had increased in extent by nearly a yard. As a natural consequence, its velocity was also much greater. But what mainly disturbed me was the idea that it had perceptibly descended. I now observed, with what horror it is needless to say, that its nether extremity was formed of a crescent of glittering steel, about a foot in length from horn to horn, the horns upward, and the under edge evidently as keen as that of a razor. Like a razor also, it seemed massy and heavy, tapering from the edge with a solid and broad structure above. It was appended to a weighty rod of brass, and the whole hissed as it swung through the air. I could no longer doubt the doom prepared for me by monkish ingenuity and torture. My cognizance of the pit had become known to the inquisitorial agents. The pit, whose horrors had been destined for so bold a recusant as myself. The pit, typical of hell, and regarded by rumor as the ultima thule of all their punishments. The plunge into this pit I had avoided by the merest of accidents, and I knew that surprise, or entrapment into torment, formed an important portion of all the grotesquerie of these dungeon deaths. Having failed to fall, it was no part of the demon plan to hurl me into the abyss, and thus, there being no alternative, a different and milder destruction awaited me. Milder. I half smiled in my agony as I thought of such application of such a term. What boots it to tell of the long, long hours of horror, more than mortal, during which I counted the rushing oscillations of the steel, inch by inch, line by line, with a descent only appreciable at intervals that seemed ages. Down and still down it came. Days passed. It might have been that many days passed, ere it swept so closely over me as to fan me with its acrid breath. The odor of the sharp steel forced itself into my nostrils. I prayed. I wearied heaven with my prayer for its more speedy descent. I grew frantically mad, and struggled to force myself upward against the sweep of the fearful scimitar. And then I fell suddenly calm, and lay smiling at the glittering death, as a child at some rare bauble. There was another interval of utter insensibility. It was brief, for, upon again lapsing into life, there had been no perceptible descent in the pendulum. But it might have been long, for I knew there were demons who took note of my swoon, and who could have arrested the vibration at pleasure. Upon my recovery, too, I felt very, inexpressibly, sick and weak, as if through long inanition. Even amid the agonies of that period, the human nature craved food. With painful effort, I outstretched my left arm as far as my bonds permitted, and took possession of the small remnant which had been spared me by the rats. I put a portion of it within my lips. There rushed to my mind a half-formed thought of joy, of hope. Yet what business had I with hope? It was, as I say, a half-formed thought. Man has many such, which are never completed. I felt that it was of joy, of hope. But I felt also that it had perished in its formation. In vain I struggled to perfect, to regain it. Long suffering had nearly annihilated all my ordinary powers of mind. I was an imbecile, an idiot. The vibration of the pendulum was at right angles to my length. I saw that the crescent was designed to cross the region of the heart. It would fray the serge of my robe. It would return and repeat its operations again and again. Notwithstanding its terrifically wide sweep, some 30 feet or more, and the hissing vigor of its descent, sufficient to sunder these very walls of iron, still the fraying of my robe would be all that, for several minutes, it would accomplish. And at this thought I paused. I dare not go further than this reflection. I dwelt upon it with a pertinacity of attention, as if, in so dwelling, I could arrest here the descent of the steel. I forced myself to ponder upon the sound of it, the crescent as it should pass across the garment, upon the peculiar, thrilling sensation which the friction of cloth produces on the nerves.
Champagne Samo, hello baby. Hello.
I pondered upon all this frivolity, until my teeth were on edge. Down, steadily down it crept. I took a frenzied pleasure in constraining its downward with its lateral velocity, to the right, to the left, far and wide, with the shriek of a damned spirit, to my heart, with the stealthy pace of the tiger. I alternately laughed and howled, as the one or the other idea grew predominant. Down, certainly relentlessly down, it vibrated within 3 inches of my bosom. I struggled violently, furiously, to free my left arm. This was free only from the elbow to the hand. I could reach the latter, from the platter beside me, to my mouth with great effort, but no further. Could I have broken the fastenings above the elbow, and would have seized and attempted to arrest the pendulum, I might as well have attempted to arrest an avalanche. Down, still unceasingly, still inevitably down. I gasped and struggled at each vibration. I shrunk convulsively at its every sweep. My eyes followed its outward or upward whirls with the eagerness of the most unmeaning despair. They closed themselves spasmodically at the descent, although death would have been a relief, oh, how unspeakable. Still I quivered in every nerve to think how slightly a sinking of the machinery would precipitate that keen, glistening axe upon my bosom. It was hope that prompted the nerve to quiver, the frame to shrink. It was hope. The hope that triumphs on the rack, that whispers to the death condemned even in the dungeons of the Inquisition. I saw that some 10 or 12 vibrations would bring the steel in actual contact with my robe, and with this observation there suddenly came over my spirit all the keen, collected calmness of despair. For the first time during many hours, or perhaps days, I thought. It now occurred to me that the bandage, or surcingle, which enveloped me, was unique. I was tied by no separate cord. The first stroke of the razor-like crescent athwart any portion of the band was so detached that I might be unwound from my person by means of my left hand. But how fearful in that case! The proximity of the steel, the result of the slightest struggle, how deadly! Was it likely, moreover, that the minions of the torturer had not foreseen and provided for this possibility? Was it probable that the bandage crossed my bosom in the track of the pendulum?
Thank you for the hearts, babies. Thank you.
Dreading to find my fate, and, as it seemed, my last hope frustrated, I so far elevated my head as to obtain a distinct view of my breast. The surcingle enveloped my limbs and body close in all directions, save in the path of the destroying crescent. Scarcely had I dropped my head back into its original position when there flashed upon my mind what I cannot better describe than as the unformed half of that idea of deliverance to which I have previously alluded, and which a moiety only floated indeterminately through my brain when I raised food to my burning lips. The whole thought was now present, feeble, scarcely sane, scarcely definite, but still entire. I proceeded at once with the nervous energy of despair to attempt its execution. For many hours, the immediate vicinity of the low framework upon which I lay had been literally swarming with rats. They were wild, bold, ravenous, their red eyes glaring upon me as if they waited but for motionlessness on my part to make me their prey. To what food, I thought, have they been accustomed in the well? They had devoured, in spite of all my efforts to prevent them, all but a small remnant of the contents of the dish. I had fallen into a habitual seesaw or wave of the hand about the platter, and at length the unconscious uniformity of the movement deprived it of effect. In their voracity, the vermin frequently fastened their sharp fangs in my fingers. With the particles of the oily and spicy viand, which now remained, I thoroughly rubbed the bandage where I could reach it. Then, raising my hand from the floor, I lay breathlessly still. At first, the ravenous animals were startled and terrified at the change, at the cessation of movement. They shrank alarmedly back. Many sought the well. This was only for a moment. I had not counted in vain upon their voracity. Observing that I remained without motion, one or two of the boldest leaped upon the framework and smelt as a surcingle. This seemed the signal for a general rush. Forth from the well they hurried in fresh troops. They clung to the wood, they overran it, they leaped in hundreds upon my person. The measured movement of the pendulum disturbed them not at all. Avoiding its strokes, they busied themselves with the anointed bandage. They pressed, they swarmed upon me in ever-accumulating heaps, they writhed upon my throat, their cold lips sought my own. I was half stifled by their thronging pressure. Disgust, for which the world has no name, swelled my bosom and chilled with a heavy clamminess my heart. Yet 1 minute, and I felt that the struggle would be over. Plainly, I perceived the loosening of the bandage. I knew that in more than one place it must be already severed. With a more than human resolution, I lay still. Nor had I erred in my calculations, nor had I endured in vain. I at length felt that I was free. The surcingle hung in ribands from my body. But the stroke of the pendulum already pressed upon my bosom. It had divided the serge of the robe. It had cut through the linen beneath. Twice again it swung, and a sharp sense of pain shot through every nerve. But the moment of escape had arrived. At a wave of my hand, my deliverers hurried tumultuously away. With a steady movement, cautious, sidelong, shrinking, and slow, I slid from the embrace of the bandage beyond the reach of the scimitar. For the moment, at least, I was free.
Drinking some water.
Free, and in the grasp of the Inquisition. I had scarcely stepped from my wooden bed of horror upon the stone floor of the prison when the motion of the hellish machine ceased, and I beheld it drawn up, by some invisible force, through the ceiling. This was a lesson which I took desperately to heart. My every motion was undoubtedly watched. Free! I had but escaped death in one form of agony, to be delivered unto worse than death in some other. With that thought, I rolled my eyes nervously around on the barriers of iron that hemmed me in. Something unusual, some change which, at first, I could not appreciate distinctly. It was obvious, had taken place in the apartment. For many minutes of a dreamy and trembling abstraction, I busied myself in vain, unconnected conjecture. During this period, I became aware, for the first time, of the origin of the sulphurous light which illumined the cell. It proceeded from a fissure about half an inch in width, extended entirely around the prison at the base of the walls, which thus appeared and were completely separated from the floor. I endeavored, but of course in vain, to look through the aperture. As I rose from the attempt, the mystery of the alteration in the chamber broke at once upon my understanding. I have observed that, although the outlines of the figures upon the wall were sufficiently distinct, yet the colors seemed blurred and indefinite. These colors now assumed, and were momentarily assuming, a startling and most intense brilliancy that gave to the spectral and fiendish portraitures an aspect that might have thrilled even firmer nerves than my own. Demon eyes of a wild and ghastly vivacity glared upon me in 1,000 directions, where none had been visible before, and gleamed with the lurid luster of a fire which I could not force my imagination to regard as unreal. Unreal. Even while I breathed, there came to my nostrils the breath of the vapor of heated iron. A suffocating odor pervaded the prison. A deeper glow settled each moment in the eyes that glared at my agonies. A richer tint of crimson diffused itself over the pictured horrors of blood. I panted. I gasped for breath. There could be no doubt of the design of my tormentors. Oh, most unrelenting, oh, most demonic of men, I shrank from the glowing metal to the center of the cell. Amid the thought of the fiery destruction that impended, the idea of the coolness of the well came over my soul like balm. I rushed to its deadly brink. I threw my straining vision below. The glare from the enkindled roof illumined its inmost recesses. Yet for a wild moment my spirit refused to comprehend the meaning of what I saw. At length it wrestled its way into my soul. It burned itself in upon my shuddering reason. Oh, for a voice to speak! Oh, horror, oh, any horror but this! With a shriek I rushed from the margin and buried my face in my hands, weeping bitterly. The heat rapidly increased, and once again I looked up, shuddering as with a fit of the ague. There had been a second change in the cell, and now the change was obviously in the form. As before, it was in vain that I first endeavored to appreciate or understand what was taking place. Was taking place, but not long was I left in doubt. The inquisitorial vengeance had been hurried by my twofold escape, and there was to be no more dallying with the king of terrors. The room had been square. I saw that 2 of its iron angles were now acute, 2, consequently, obtuse. The fearful difference quickly increased with a low rumbling or moaning sound. In an instant the apartment had shifted its form into that of a lozenge. But the alteration stopped not there. I neither hoped nor desired it to stop. I could have clasped the red walls to my bosom as a garment of eternal peace. Death, I said. Any death but that of the pit. Fool! Might I not have known that into the pit it was the object of the burning iron to urge me? Could I resist its glow? Or, if even that, could I withstand its pressure? And now, flatter and flatter, grew the lozenge, with a rapidity that left me no time for contemplation. Its center, and of course its greatest width, came just over the yawning gulf. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me resistlessly onward. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold on the firm floor of the prison. I struggled no more, but the agony of my soul found vent in one loud, long, and final scream of despair. I felt that I tottered upon the brink. I averted my eyes. There was a discordant hum of human voices. There was a loud blast as of many trumpets. There was a harsh grating as of 1,000 thunders. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell, fainting into the abyss. It was that of General Lasalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Inquisition was in the hands of its enemies. Oh, I forgot that had more of a hopeful ending. There you go, guys. Let me show you guys the picture. Because this is very difficult. So, for anyone confused, so let me see here. Prison shape. It's hard to find pictures of it. So, for anyone who might be confused, this is a story of a prisoner who's captured by the Inquisition. Toledo is in Spain, I think? Toledo. Spain? Yes, it's a city in Spain. So he was captured by the Spanish Inquisition. I laugh as I say that because it's so obvious. Should have been so obvious. So this poor gentleman was convicted to a torturous death by the Spanish Inquisition. And he was put in this prison. He's put in this prison. So they had a lot planned for him. So he was supposed to find his way accidentally into this giant pit in the floor of his cell, because it was pitch black dark. So he couldn't really see his way around. And he, by chance, because the floor was slippery, because it's cold and wet, because it's a dungeon, you know, deep in the bowels of the earth. And he happened to be lucky enough to slip and fall just on the edge. His, like, face, like, his chin was, like, hanging over the pit. Like, he just missed falling into it. And he realized what it was, and he, like, backs up in horror, and he's like, oh no! And then the Inquisition, which has been monitoring him this entire time, because they were bringing him food and water to keep him alive until, you know, he died this horrible death. They found that he escaped that one method of death, so they're like, all right, mister, let's try something else. So the next time they bring him food and water, they drug the water so he passes out. And while he's unconscious, they strap him to this board on the floor. And this pendulum, this swinging blade, I know you guys have probably seen those big swinging blades, you know? This big crescent shape, like, it's like a crescent moon blade. It, like, was swinging and slowly lowering down on him. And it took him a while to realize that. And he's just lying there, like, freaking out, because he's completely bound up, and he can't really move except his one arm. And I don't know why they left his one arm unbound. So, what he did to get out of this predicament was he notices that there are rats all around him. And these rats are ravenous. They are super, super hungry. But he was left a chunk of meat to sustain him because they wanted to, the Inquisitors wanted to keep him alive so he could suffer that torturous death. They're like, you're not going to die yet, mister. So that pendulum, the swinging blade, was moving so slowly that he was laying there for days and days and days, and all these rats were, like, gathering around him. And he eventually devised an idea. So the bindings that were on him, there's a little piece of that meat left, because they left him, like, this chunk of, like, seasoned meat, but the rats had eaten most of it. But there was this little tiny baby bit left, and he, like, rubbed it on his hands so his hands smelled like it. And then he rubbed his free hand, because he had a free hand for some reason. He rubbed it over the bindings that kept him tied down so the blade could eventually cut him in half. He rubbed it, and the rats were like, ooh, and so they come over, and they start, you know, smelling it. And it lures, like, other rats. And there's this weird moment where, like, they're all up on him, and then he pretends to be dead, and they all run away because the sudden movement, like, scares them, and then more of them come back. So I guess he was trying to lure more of them to him. Or maybe he chased them away so he could rub the stuff on him, because they were already on him. That's what happened. So they were already on him. He's like, get out of here. And, you know, he had to pretend to be dead because it's like sudden movement, like, loss of movement spooked them. They're like, whoa, what happened? And then he rubbed the stuff on him, I think, and then, like, the meat juices and the seasonings that were on the meat. And then all these rats came back, and they started chewing into his bindings because he had rubbed the juices on there, and they were chewing through it. And the blade was lowering, and the rats didn't even care about the big blade swinging back and forth, and they just kept chewing on his bindings, where eventually he was able to get loose, and just in time when the blade was swinging through his, like, prison robes and was cutting through them, he was able to, like, manage to get himself out of there. And then his imprisoners, the Inquisitors, were like, okay, wise guy. And so the last thing they did, which he didn't realize they could do, also, dang, plot armor, go crazy. So like so another thing that the story makes clear is how like big the chamber he's in. And like, since it's so dark, he's trying to feel around, like earlier before he gets tied down, like he's feeling around, and he rips off a piece of like his prison robes to use as like a measuring tape kind of thing to see how big this prison is. And I think he like underestimates the size or overestimates how big it is. And even what it's made out of, because there's a point where the prison cell gets lit up and he can see much, much better. And he sees that it has a really strange shape, and he's like, okay. And then, so we get to the part where he gets out of the bindings, and he's like, I'm free. And then, like, of course, the Inquisitors are like, So, like, they come in, and apparently this little cell he's imprisoned in, they can move, like, the walls around and make them squish, like, smaller and smaller and smaller. And since it's made out of metal, it's also, like, lit, like, it's, I guess they have, like, fire somewhere in the walls that's, like, heating up the metal on the walls. So it's, like, overheating him, and it's getting closer and closer and closer. It's like, well, he can't hug the walls now because they're made out of metal, and they're now, like, flaming hot, and he's gonna just melt his flesh off. So it, like, the walls are like constricting and pushing him closer and closer into the pit. Yes, Cynical Apple, what's up, baby? So they're trying to push him into the pit, and then right at the end, right as he like passes out and slips in the pit, a French, like I think it was like a general or soldier, grabs his arm and saves him, because the French invaded the where the Inquisitors were. And they were saving all the prisoners because these people were imprisoned wrongfully, it sounds like. So yeah, that's the explanation of that. But there was actually a happy ending, which I totally forgot about, because I read this a long, long time ago. So yeah. That is all our readings for today. If you missed the first bit of the stream, the VOD will always be there. So all my VODs will be there for you guys. And so yeah, if you're new here and you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on all the notifications with that little bell, and like the video and comment if you'd like to, but you don't have to do any of that stuff. It just helps me greatly. You're very welcome, Cynical Apple, and thank you for joining us today, and welcome to the Entourage. You're brand new, so welcome, welcome. If you have any comments or questions or anything, you can poke me in the comments on YouTube. You can @ me on Twitter. My Twitter and such and whatnot is all below. So yes, let's see who all joined me today. Thank you, Cynical Apple, Pizza Queen, Champagne Sumo, Lost Victor. Oh, I forgot to read what you said to me, Pizza Queen. I remember back in 7th grade English, there was an assignment to memorize and complete the Raven poem and recite in front of class. I didn't miss a line. A+ 100%. Oh, baby, I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. Yeah. And then who else joined us today? Let's see. Champagne Sumo, Lost Victorian. You may call Midnight. Popped in. Wellpour was here. Whisk was here, or might still be here, just being silent. And our little stream element spot has joined us for the first time today. It should give me notifications when someone subscribes, and when I finally get like donations and all of that thing set up, it should pop up with notifications. But yes, that's all for today. You may go, hello baby. It's so lovely to see you still here. Gonna wind down for now. I will leave you all for the day. So for next week, my plans, I'll probably take the next 2 days off to rest, since we had streams a few days in a row. And then we'll continue on with, oh, I know what I want to play. So you guys will just have to wait and see. Let me check. Twitter here because I alternate days, so I catch different days every week. So some weeks it's like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Some it's Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So if there are those of you who really maybe can't join us on, you know, Monday or Wednesday or anything, you can join us on the other days. So yeah, this week it was a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday week. The next week, our first stream will be on Monday. And for those of you in chat who are new or maybe haven't been around for some of our other streams, all during the summer we're doing every Sunday we're doing our spooky campfire stories. So we'll always have a stream on Sundays, like today. Hey, would you ever play Street Fighter 6 in the future? Unfortunately not. Fighting games aren't really my thing, but I will outline to you what type of games I do like. I really like Doom, or anything like Doom. I've also played Dusk. I want to also play Quake. I've been working my way slowly through all the Dooms, all the Resident Evils. We're currently on Doom 2 and Resident Evil 2, funnily enough. I also play Elder Scrolls games like Oblivion and Skyrim. I play lots of retro games on the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, you know, that kind of thing. This month has been a big retro month. We are doing a 100% clear of Ocarina of Time. We're doing an all Melon run in Yoshi Story, and we started an all Treasure run in Luigi's Mansion. I do like that, yes, but I do also like open world exploration. Like I said, like the Elder Scrolls games. Yep, not turn-based RPGs though. Turn-based battles make me miserable, so... but I'm always open to try a bunch of different things. Like Doom, for example, wasn't something in my original repertoire, but I was always curious about it. I gave it a chance and I absolutely fell in love. I also play horror, a lot of horror stories. I do both roleplay ASMR and reading ASMR like this. I don't think I'd ever do traditional ASMR because it's just not really my thing. I don't understand it well enough, and it's just, I feel it would get really, really boring for me to do that for so long. So I've also been playing through Stardew Valley. We've also I did a language stream. I did a Japanese and a Latin language stream, but I found that language streams weren't really working out for me. We're also going through Elden Ring and Hades as well. I also want to go through all the old Tomb Raiders. Souls games. Yes, it's funny you should mention that. As I said, hello, Miss Baby, hello. I'm going to put this up because it's just like our chill hangout time. So I can catch up with you guys a little bit. But yes, I'm working my way through Elden Ring, and I do want to go through all the Souls games. I really want to play Bloodborne, but it's not available on PC yet. But yeah, my first Souls-like ever has been Elden Ring, and it's been a great time, but it always takes me a while to get used to the controls again. We had a Skyrim playthrough going, that's kind of on hold right now. We've been going through Oblivion. I played through Amnesia and Spooky's House of Jump Scares, and right now our horror game is Resident Evil, but I want to play as many horror games as I can get my little talons on. Continuing Luigi Mansion. Yes, we're definitely going to continue Luigi Mansion. Why is there Peanut in the tree? That is SCP-173, and he is joining us because he's a good boy, and we love him. He does look like a peanut though, doesn't he? But I've read some SCP stories. I've read that's the wrong. I want to turn off the light because I don't need it on anymore. I feel about Neo. Neo. I'm not sure about Neo. It's another Souls-like, isn't it? So it's a maybe. But I want to get through the Dark Souls games first for sure. So it's a maybe, yeah. He's a spicy little peanut. He is indeed, yeah. Yes. So some genres I'll never play on the channel would be, like I said, fighting games, probably not unless there's a unique twist to them. Wisp. Okay, let me read what you said, just for the VOD. Would you read us some SCPs or creepypasta? I already have Whisk. We actually do have some SCP streams. I can link them to you guys now if you would like. I have a whole playlist of our spooky campfire story streams that you guys can catch up on. Here you go. So let me go through them here. We have done SCP. We've done Lovecraft. We've done SCP. And there are actually some spooky stories in Skyrim that I read to you guys. And SCP, so we've done a lot of SCP. I wanted to read things like Glitch in the Matrix and like all the classic like creepypasta stuff from like various forums and whatnot. But the problem that I came into with that is you have to get permission from the authors, like, and I know some of you might say, well, people read them all the time. Yeah, that doesn't mean you should still do it, right? But the unfortunate thing about that is, one, it might take a while for them to reply. Two, these might be defunct accounts that these people haven't checked in a decade, and like, I still don't think it's right for me to read their stuff. Like, it's a really weird, like, thing, you know, and I don't want to disrespect any fellow creative artists and whatnot. So no, I didn't even know it was a peanut. I did that on purpose. I faded everything out so it kind of blended in. Yeah, thank you. You're very welcome. Okay, here's the list, guys, and I'm gonna add this to the list. I keep all my playlists very updated, so that's the playlist. Let me just put here, playlist for spooky readings. This keyboard is so sensitive to touch and my fingers are so fast. A playlist for spooky readings. There you go, guys. And I do keep frequent playlists, and I keep them updated. So if you're looking for a stream, go check out my little the playlist section, and I keep them all very up to date. Actually, I could add this one live while I'm talking to you guys. It can go on. There it is. And I have little icons on there too. I thought that was a cute idea. There we go. There we go. Add it to the playlist. What twist would get you to play fighting games? If it wasn't like the main focus, maybe, or like it was just part of the game, maybe. One fighting game I did kind of get into was Guilty Gear. And I know the new one came out, but I don't know. I'm just not super into fighting games, so it'd have to be some really unique setup with the genre. Another genre that I will never really play on stream, except for very, very few exceptions. There's only one exception I can think of right now, are turn-based RPG games and strategy games. Turn-based stuff just makes me absolutely miserable. It's just not fun at all. Which is a shame, because a lot of turn-based RPG games have amazing stories, which I'm a big story and lore aficionado, so it's a damn shame. But one RPG that I was able to tolerate was an older one called The Legend of Dragoon, because while the battles are happening, you still have to do this system called additions, where these squares like come up on the screen. It's kind of like, not quite a rhythm game, but it's kind of close. You have to like line them up and still press buttons. Honkai, no. It's a phone game. I don't play phone games. Playing games on such a small screen is also miserable for me. All my games are either PC or console. I play Genshin Impact, though. If Honkai were on PC and not turn-based, I would play it, but I do not like turn-based battles. No. And the only thing I've ever played on my phone was like a dress-up game. So no. Unfortunately not. Will I play Genshin on stream? I'm very hesitant to play Genshin on stream, for sure. I love that game to death. I love that game so much. I have a very well set up team, and I do Spiral Abyss, and it makes me break keyboards. So it's might be very entertaining. Let me catch up with you guys. Which of these life simulation games do you like best? Animal Crossing, Stardew Valley, Harvest Moon. Maybe Animal Crossing or Stardew, I would say, because I've played all of them. It's late at night for me, so apologies. It's okay, baby. It's okay, no worries. But you must be... Oh no, I don't know how to read that. I'm sorry. Is you lost your mind too? You're gonna go listen to the spooky readings. Well, then this was perfect for you, darling. It was perfect. Nice spooky stories for a spooky night. But I hope you don't have bad dreams or nightmares. And you can tell me what language that is. I don't want to butcher it. Which, by the way, it's in one of our rules. How much geld means money you spent on Genshin? That's a good question. Not as much as you would think, because my luck is ridiculous. But yes, good night, Apple. Get some beautiful rest. I hope you sleep well. Thank you for joining the Entourage. Don't forget to subscribe and like and all that lovely stuff. And thank you for joining us. But yes, in our rules below, you guys are welcome to speak in whatever language you want, even if I don't understand you. As long as you're following the rules, you can speak whatever language you want. And I will look at Afrikaans. That is amazing. That's so cool. I've never seen a speaker of Afrikaans before. That's so cool.
Hello, baby, hello. We're just having our little hangout session after reading Poe, so we can kind of wind down and be comfy in case anybody's too spooked. Too spooky. Yeah, I started playing Honkai Star Rail, but I'm not a fan of turn-based battles. Yeah, me either. It's just so miserable for me. And I mean, no shade to anyone who enjoys them. I mean, I think that's awesome. I have plenty of angels and human friends that love turn-based battles, and I'm like, that's great. It's just something I can't personally enjoy unless there's some extra element to it where you move around or whatever. That's why I like Genshin so much, because you move around and you actually have to like dodge and stuff like that and things like that. That's why I ended up liking Elden Ring so much too. But yeah, with Genshin, I actually got supremely lucky that I've not had to spend as much money as most people have. I have Zhongli up to, I think, C4, and I think the most I've spent on his constellations was a gift, a $50 gift from a friend. So I've gotten very lucky with Zhongli, and he's also my favorite. He is amazing, and I have his entire setup done perfectly. He's at max level. He has this best in slot weapon. I have the red Hu Tao weapon. What's it called? I can't remember what it's called. I also have his lore weapon because that's how much of a simp I am. But how dedicated I am. But yes, welcome in, Auntie you. Welcome, baby. Oh, why are you guys saying goodnight? I'm still saying, I'm staying till you finish. Oh no, cynic level. Oh no. Go to bed if you need to. You don't have to stay up unless, it's okay if you want to stay. That's fine too. Oh, I'm sorry that you were going to say my bed. It's okay, guys. It's okay. Staff of Homa. Thank you, yeah, that's what it's called. Staff of Homa is his best in slot. And there are 3 different ways you can set up Zhongli. You can set him up, like his best setup is as like a damage support, like with his elemental skills, with his meteor, make his meteors do the big booms. And have him at I have him at 30k HP, and his meteors can do anywhere from, they can get up to 100,000 when they crit. Then you can outfit him just as a shield bot, which I think you can do, but I think is a waste of his kit and who he is as a character, because he has so much to offer. And the hilarious option that I enjoyed quite a bit is making him into a physical DPS, which you can do with the right setup and weapons, and it is hilarious and so much fun because his base combo is so satisfying, like his base regular attack combo. Yes, I can talk for ages and ages, especially if I have a captive audience and many people speaking back to me. You're gonna be here all night. But no, in all seriousness, I actually have plans for the rest of the day, so I probably will have to be wrapping this up soon. But the VOD will be there for you all for if you've missed any of the stream. It will be there for you. And if you're new, feel free to check out all my other content. I've done retro stuff, and I have playlists that organize everything very, very nicely. Let's see. I have my retro playlist, which right now I have some Nintendo 64 games and some GameCube, but we're gonna branch into PlayStation as well. I have a Zelda game playlist. I made an unlisted clips playlist. I don't know what to do with clips right now, so I have my Elden Ring playlist. I have my language learning playlist. I have the spooky campfire stories, 80s, Stardew Valley, my Skyrim mod collection, which was a series I was working on of pre-recorded content that's kind of on hold right now. I have a miscellaneous playlist for stuff that didn't really fit anywhere else. My roleplay ASMRs, which are separate from the reading ASMRs. Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, my Doom playlist. Some of my Skyrim playlists for my different characters is one for me in Skyrim. There's one for my demon persona Kalikari in Skyrim. There's my horror LPs playlist, which will have Spookies, House of Jump Scares, or Spookies Jump. I don't remember what they renamed it. Spookies Jump Scare Mansion or some nonsense. Resident Evil would be on there. Amnesia and any other horror games I play. I have my Tea Times, which is just like my little vlog series, I guess, where I give you guys updates and talk about myself in various modes and whatnot. My Skyrim adventures for our Dovahkiin, her name is Maheli. And that would be all of them. So there's a lot of content for you all to check out and enjoy.
I do have a demon persona. Yes, her name's Khione Aria. How far are you in Elden Ring? Not very far. I still need to do Margit. And I keep, like, we've done a few streams, but one of the Elden Ring streams was one of our longest streams. But yeah, I gave him a try and failed miserably. But I've been training up, and yeah, we're gonna return to that soon, hopefully. Me acting like I've ever played or ever played Genshin. It's okay, Cynical Apple. It's not everyone's cup of tea. That's totally fine. Even stuff that's super popular is gonna have plenty of people who are just not interested. You guys want to know a funny story? I had zero interest when Genshin first came out, because I was the sort of individual where I like, and I still am like this, like if I can, I make my own custom characters to go on adventures on, because I'm a writer, I'm a creator of a bunch of different like OCs and whatnot, and they're very dear to me, so I usually make them in games. So in Genshin, you would play as other characters, and the main character you can't really customize. You either pick which twin you want to be, and then you name them, and that's it. You can't really make them look a certain way. So there, I sat there and I was like, I have zero interest in this because I can't make my own characters. But I gave it a chance, and I had to give it several chances because this is me we're talking about. And I fell in love eventually. I fell in love with the combat and the characters and the storytelling and the world, and it's given me so much happiness, so much inspiration for my own works, and opened my mind to so many possibilities of what you can do with a story. So yeah, but I understand it's not for everybody, and that's totally fine. I use Zhongli as a shield mostly because it's an easy way to build. I'm focused on that's fine, Whis, that's fine. No, he's an amazing shielder, and that's a totally valid way. Yeah, if he's not, I'm a Zhongli main, so of course, like I get really into like his kit and everything, and making him the main focus of my parties. He never leaves my party, by the way, unless it's spiral based where you have to split into two parties. But anyway, but yeah, no, he will save you from so much like nonsense and just mess ups and everything, and you can just go full in and just hit things and not have to worry about getting hit and stuff. It's amazing. It's Spooky's House of Jump Scares. It's not Spooky's House of Jump. No, they actually had to change it. It will always be Spooky's House of Jump Scares in my heart. That's what I first knew it as. But there was like this German mobile app or something that had it was called Spooky's House. And because of copyright, cease and desist nonsense, like the maker of Spooky's House of Jump Scares had to change the name to Spooky's Jump Scare Mansion, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's barely similar. They're clearly two different things, but whatever. They didn't want to have to deal with the legal nonsense, so they changed the name. And the way they changed it was really funny because they just took they made the design where they had, they put like a piece of tape over the old name and they just like scribbled the new name on it in the game's main menu screen. Yes, my demon persona actually hosted her own stream on her birthday, which is summer solstice, so June 21st. She came and joined you guys, and I can link that for you here. She hasn't gotten to hang out with you guys all that much. Sometimes I'll just play as her, and it won't necessarily be her that's talking to you guys. I also have a male counterpart named Hamelness, which means winter, which, by the way, for anyone new or anyone who doesn't know, Khione Aria, my name, which you can call me either. You can call me Khione, you can call me Aria. Khione means snow. It is also the Greek goddess of snow. And Aria is just a type of song, or it's like the solo in an opera, but it can also be Italian for lioness. So, as an angelic being, it's not my real name technically. I've had a lot of names throughout my long 1,000 years, and I'm a dimensional traveler, and I'm kind of stuck here on Earth for a while, but I need to redo my little story I did about myself, my lore. But if you guys want to meet Khione Aria, she's here in this stream. Favorite Fatui? Ooh, that's a good question, Whisk. You're a writer. Yo, that's cool. Thank you, Cinemagalactica. Thank you. I am a fantasy writer, yes. Not professionally. It's a very, 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 very passionate hobby of mine. I don't know if I ever want to get published. Probably not, but we'll see. And I don't know if I'll ever incorporate it. This isn't actually my true form. No, you're exactly right, Cynical Apple. It is not. And my true name would, like, melt your guys' eardrums, and my true form would melt your eyeballs. So I can't actually show it to you guys. So I just take on many other forms, because I'm a shapeshifter, of course. Most angels are. I'm a different species of angels from the ones you guys know here, though, so I have some different properties. But this is the form I project to you guys so I don't melt your eyeballs. And I also have to borrow human vessels to interact with the world sometimes. So, favorite Fatui though. Ooh, I love the Fatui, by the way. My favorite? It's probably like a tie. Okay, we don't know much about a lot of them yet. It's a tie between Dottore and maybe Tartaglia. Funny story. When I first met Tartaglia, or Child, in the story, I absolutely hated him. I thought he was annoying. I thought he was stupid. I was like, who's this motherfucker? You know, I didn't like him at all. And then he grew on me, and now he's like my bestie in the game. And he's amazing. Like, I actually got him accidentally from one of the banners, and I'm like, what the hell? And he's really hard to learn. I remember when I first got him, I didn't understand his kit at all. And I had another angel that I know that was super into the game, and she taught me how to play him. And once I learned, I'm like, this guy is awesome. His kit is amazing. He's one of my favorite characters to play in the entire game. I fell in love with his boss battle too. Spoiler warning, sorry guys. But it's been out for a while. But there's more to it, you know, to his character and everything. And I think he's just a really rad guy. I really like Dottore because mad doctors, am I right? And he's got all this crazy weirdness going on. Like, I just like that about characters where they're just kind of mysterious and they can do all these weird stuff. I really like Signora. I think she's absolutely beautiful. And it's strange because I'm usually drawn to female appearances over male. Like, by the way, guys, I'm bi. I like both genders. Hello, hey, where? Like, most of the women, I was just like, oh, they're pretty, I guess, but I didn't get really attached to anyone. But Signora, I thought was so beautiful. Like, she's so pretty. And then there's Arlecchino, who's coming out for Fontaine, I think. She's absolutely gorgeous too, but we don't really know much about her. Signora's backstory is also really interesting, and I love Genshin's storytelling, how they like tell story that's to come through the artifacts. So anyone who doesn't know Genshin, like, you know how in games you can like equip your characters with stuff? In Genshin you have their weapon and then what's called their artifacts. And they have 5 different artifacts you can equip them with. And the artifacts, every artifact set has a story tied to it. And it's more subtle and stuff. It's kind of like Dark Souls storytelling in that you kind of have to put pieces together. And Signora's backstory was in one of those artifact sets, and people just had theories it was about her for the longest time. People in the Genshin lore community are absolutely brilliant and crazy smart and crazy good at putting stuff together. I learned so much about their theories about like Khione Aria and the Fatui and all this crazy stuff. It's amazing. And they've guessed so many things right. Like, they picked up so many little tiny details that you wouldn't even normally notice, and been like, oh, this is Signora, and this is about, like, they predicted something was about like Scaramouche, and it turned out it was about him, and it was like crazy how good these people are. But it's in a whole community working together, right? And the storytelling in Genshin is just fantastic. I love it so much. Aria doesn't mean lioness, though. It doesn't? I thought it meant lioness in Italian. Pretty sure that's one of the meanings I looked up. Oh, it's lioness in Greek. I mixed up the languages. Thank you, Wiz. Thank you, baby. Yeah, my dang dyslexia. So the Italian part is aria. It's song or melody in Italian. And then lioness is the Greek meaning. Okay, I flipped them. Oh, I'm so sorry, guys. Thank you so much, Wiz. I do that sometimes. Oh, goodness. Yeah, I'm good with this beautiful form. What you talking about? Yeah, we're still talking about Genshin. I bite too with her hot, love this cougar milfs. Oh, it's so cute. Genshin reading stream when? Like Souls community good. You know what, Cynical Apple? I could do that. I never thought of that. It means wind? Not from what it's saying right here. But, this could be wrong. It says the meaning of aria is air, melody, tune. Okay, so it's like, yeah, I can see how it also means wind. Yeah, multiple. An aria is a self-contained piece for one voice with or without instrumental orchestral accompaniment. In Italian, aria translates to air, but also means song or melody. Okay. Now we see. Thank you so much, Wes. Thank you, baby. Wait, it also is in... That looks like Arabic. No, that's Sanskrit. It's also a Sanskrit name? Aria can be a male or female name depending on the country of origin. In Sanskrit, though often transcribed Aria means noble or honorable. Italian aria refers both to air and the melody, aria. In Albanian, aria or ari means treasure or gold or of high value. It also means lion in Hebrew and noble in Persian. In Persian, the name is used for males, whereas in India, it uses a male and female given name. Well, there we go. Thank you, Wes. Thank you so much, baby. Genshin Reach, like Souls Community good. Yeah, it is that good. Yeah. Like, it's in a similar vein of storytelling, where you just have to, like, read the artifacts and piece it together. Like, a lot of the story is, like, right in your face, too. Like, there's the main quest line or whatever. But thank you so much, Wiz. Oh, I can't believe I mixed that up and totally missed some of the meanings. Thank you so much, baby. Thank you, thank you. Do you speak Italian, Whisk? You don't have to answer that, by the way. I mean, we don't usually use aria when we talk about music, but if Google says so. In other countries, it's a type of opera. An aria is a solo in an opera. It's an accompanied, elaborate melody sung as in an opera by a single voice. So yeah, other countries use it for like opera and stuff. Here's dictionary, Merriam-Webster. Number 1, air, melody, tune, specifically an accompanied elaborate melody sung as in an opera by a single voice. Number 2, a striking solo performance as in a movie. And number 3, a written or spoken passage or text likened to a dramatic or emotional operatic solo. The way I speak Italian, so I did. Okay, Wiz, thank you, baby, thank you. I just wanted to give everybody the actual definition so there's no confusion. Yeah. That's awesome. I think there's someone else in chat that also speaks Italian. I can't remember who it was, but thank you so much, Wiz. I appreciate that. Man, I feel so bad. Yes, it's an opera thing. It's not like a general music thing. Yeah, it's like an opera tied term. Like, for example, the word like, well, soprano and all of those things are used in general voice terminology too. Like, oh, are you an alto or soprano or what on and so forth. But it is tied to opera a lot of the time too. Yeah, I know a fair, like not a fair bit about opera. I know a decent bit. I'm relearning opera because my singing ability was tied to my healing ability. And when I crossed the dimensions here to Earth, I lost a lot of my magical abilities. And unfortunately, my singing ability was part of my healing ability, so I lost it. I can carry a tune, but I'm trying to get my operatic skill back, and I'm having to learn it from scratch. How many languages do I speak? I speak English. I speak kind of intermediate to advanced Japanese. I took a year of Latin. I took a few years of Spanish. I studied a few years of Spanish. I studied a few years of French. I know Chinese words here and there. I know some Turkish. I know some Greek. I know some... I'm learning Romanian. I love learning languages so much. I don't really know a whole lot of Italian. I remember a lot of my Spanish. My Latin is pretty weak. My French is also pretty weak. My Japanese and my English are my best. My Japanese has gotten a little rusty, but I want to get fluent, would be nice. I speak angelic languages, which I can't speak to you guys because your heads would explode. I'm impressed. Oh, thank you. I wish I was better at them. I wish I was, multilingual, but I spent so much time hiding away in Antarctica that I just missed out on so much. I do. I love languages, though. It's just kind of my thing, and you guys are always welcome to teach me more. The ones I'm concentrating on right now, though, are Japanese, Greek, and Turkish, I think. I want to learn Arabic, too. And I'm also started Romanian, and I realized Romanian is... Oh, Latin! I want to get better at Latin again, because Latin's the closest to my native tongue from my home world. And yeah, I'm stuck here on Earth. And I hate saying it like that, though, because Earth's been a pretty nice experience for me. I've been here for a few hundred years. I'm only 1,000 years old, which you guys might be saying in chat, like, only, what? No, angels are
super ancient. Like, a lot of angels are like billions of years old, millions of years old. I'm very young for an angel. I'm not quite a baby. I'm just like a young angel. How do you learn a new language? I just get curious and I look it up, and I just start learning on my own. I've learned with instructors sometimes too. I've like sought them out and learned from them. I've learned from native speakers in the past. Japanese, I was fortunate enough to learn from not only native speakers, but also professors as well. People at the professor level of teaching, professionals. I learned some other languages from actual professionals as well, but a lot of them I've just started studying on my own. Greek, Turkish, and Romanian are the ones I've been learning on my own. Even before I sought out professional expertise for Japanese, I was learning that on my own. I don't know what it is. I just pick up languages really easily. I guess it's one of my strengths. I'm also really good at English. I've served as an editor for not only my friends, but also professionals who English isn't their first language. I deal really well with people who have English as a second language. I've helped people not quite translate, since I didn't necessarily know their native tongues, but I helped them with their English. So I'm really good with English. I'm really good with editing. As you guys were listening, even like I was reading Poe and I didn't really trip up all that often. And there's some very big old words in there because I read a lot as well. So I'm a reader, I'm a writer, I'm also an artist, but I don't show that off very often because it's not at a place where I'm super confident, so maybe someday. I studied Latin and Spanish. You mix them, you kind of get Italian. I can see that, yeah, because they're all like Romance languages. I really want to get fluent in Latin. And I wouldn't mind picking up my Spanish again too. Genius. I wouldn't really call myself a genius. It's just what I'm good at. I'm sure everybody in chat has something they're good at. Cynical Apple, you definitely probably have something you're good at, or maybe you haven't even found it yet. Everyone in this chat is good at something. That's my belief. Or if you haven't found it yet. Or maybe you just haven't had the time to work on it. I believe in you guys, man. Humans are amazing. I'm also an angel, so... But I'm also a very human angel, if that makes sense. Like, not only have I spent hundreds of years with you guys, so you guys have kind of rubbed off on me, but I was always kind of, among my fellow angels, I was always kind of more human, so to speak. So I've been more relatable to mortal beings. So, and I finally came out of my shell and came away from Antarctica, because I'm a winter angel, by the way. I might look kind of springy, but I'm not. I'm known as the sunlight in winter, and the winter sun, and like, because all of my species has like different attributes and elements that they're born from, because we're not born like humans are. We just kind of come forth from whatever we're a part of. So I was born from like the sparkling snow and the sunlight like hitting it. Then there's some angels that are born from like the water or the trees or whatnot. So I technically don't have a parents. I have siblings in a weird way, if you want to look at it that way. But yeah, but I've kind of gotten attached to certain humans. I'm like, oh, I get kind of a fatherly vibe from this human or a motherly vibe from this human. But you got mom vibes, and you guys are welcome to call me mom. You can call me mama or mom or mother or whatever if you feel comfy doing that. Or mommy, if that's what you want to do. I'm totally comfy with that. She really has. Thank you guys. I appreciate that. I try. I really do. It's getting late, so good night, Mama. Good night, Jack. Good night, Wiz. Good night, baby. Good night. I'm gonna head off too now. I think I've been blabbering on for long enough. You guys have learned a lot about me. I think I'm gonna I have my lore video up if you guys want to learn more about me or just review what I've been talking about. But I think I'm gonna make a new one, because that one's pretty outdated by now. I've taught you guys a lot more, and I have new assets and stuff to use. But anyway, thank you for joining me for Mr. Poe's poems and short stories today. I had a lovely time with you all, and I was glad that we got a new Entourage member in Cynical Apple. Thank you for joining us, my dear. And Whisk joined us today. Pizza Queen. Wellpour was here. Let's see who else. The Auntie U is here. Lost Victorian. Yumeko. Champagne Sumo poked in for a bit. Then we had Midnight joined us, and the little Stream Elements bot was here. And I noticed my subscribers went up, and he didn't notify me, so I guess the bot is not running properly. Oh well, maybe I didn't set it up right. Anyway, that's for me to fuss around with. If I forgot anyone, I'm sorry. And hello, VOD gang, you are also valid, or anyone who missed a live stream, the bot will still be there for you. For those of you who it's nighttime, sleep well and have sweet dreams. And I will see you on Wednesday, because I'm going to take the next Tuesdays off to rest and work on some stuff. But on Wednesday, we're going to be doing some more classic retro games. And I think I'll do Animal Crossing, but I usually do 2 streams in one day, so the other one will be a surprise. But I want to play some old-timey Animal Crossing for you guys. Good night, hope you wonder way, and same for chat. Thank you, Cynical Apple. Thank you for being so lovely, such a lovely chatter. And welcome to the Entourage. I had fun today. I'm glad to hear that, Beats Queen. Alright, everyone. I'm gonna go to my little nighty-night indie stream, so I'll see everyone on Wednesday. And poke on my Twitter and whatnot. I'll retweet stuff and I'll keep you guys updated here, but I'll also do it on YouTube as well. Anyway, that's enough out of me. Thank you for joining me, everyone, today. I'll see you on Wednesday. Until then.